I've worked at Hollow Pine Cemetery for nearly 20 years. It's quiet work, lonely most days, but I've always liked it that way. I come in before sunrise when the mist still clings to the grass and the world hasn't decided what kind of day it's going to be. The crows know me by now. They follow me from the gate to the caretaker's shed, waiting for scraps, watching like old friends who never speak. That morning was different. I remember the chill before anything else. It wasn't the usual morning cold. It felt sharper, like the air itself didn't want me there. When I stepped out of the shed, the fog was so thick it swallowed the headstones whole. Even the trees looked nervous, their branches twitching like they wanted to pull back underground. I was doing my usual rounds, checking the soil, fixing the flowers that had fallen over, brushing off names too covered in dust. The cemetery has over 200 graves, spread out in uneven lines that twist up the small hill behind the church. I know each one by heart. I could walk it blindfolded and still tell you who rests where. But that morning, something felt off. The ground near the eastern edge looked wrong. From a distance, it looked like a fresh mound, newly dug, the kind we make when there's been a burial the day before. Only there hadn't been one. I knew that. The last funeral had been 3 weeks ago for a woman named Clara Doss. Nice family, quiet ceremony. I remembered because her husband cried so softly, like he was trying not to disturb her sleep. Still, I walked toward the mound. My boots sank into the damp soil and the fog opened up just enough for me to see it clearly. A new grave, perfectly shaped, freshly dug, but no name, no headstone, no marker. That alone made my stomach turn. We never dig graves without paperwork, without records. Everything's signed, sealed, and mapped. I would have known if something was planned. I knelt beside it, ran my hand over the dirt. The soil was loose, dark, freshly turned. I could still smell the wet iron scent of the earth beneath. Whoever dug this had done it recently. Maybe last night. I looked around. No wheelbarrow, no shovel, no tracks from a truck or tools, nothing. That was the first time I felt truly uneasy. I went back to the shed and checked the logbook. Every burial, every repair, every visit, it's all written down. And as expected, there was nothing scheduled for that plot. In fact, there wasn't even supposed to be a plot there. The area was full. I sat there for a long minute, listening to the silence outside. The clock on the wall ticked too loud. It felt like the air in the shed had gone still. I told myself it was probably some kids. People like to mess around in cemeteries, especially around Halloween. They dig holes, leave weird things lying around, make a mess for me to clean up. But this wasn't that kind of hole. It was precise, professional. The edges were too clean, too straight. By noon, I decided to fill it back in. Couldn't leave it like that. Someone might fall in, or worse, start rumors. I grabbed my shovel and went back. The sun had burned most of the fog away, but the grave still looked darker than the rest of the ground, like it held its own shadow. I dug a little just to test how deep it was. That's when I realized something was wrong. The soil below wasn't compacted like it usually is after digging. It felt loose all the way down. I kept going, expecting to hit the wooden lid of a coffin, or at least the bottom boards we used to line the grave. Nothing. Just dirt. After a while, my shovel hit something hard. My heart jumped. I knelt down and brushed the dirt away with my hands. For a second, I thought it was wood. But it wasn't. It was stone. Smooth, cold, and carved. At first, I thought maybe I'd hit the top of an old grave, one that had been buried over long ago. That happens sometimes. Cemeteries this old have layers, forgotten plots beneath newer ones. But when I brushed more dirt off, I saw letters carved into the stone. Only, they weren't in English. They looked like scratches, symbols more than words, sharp angles, curling shapes, like someone had tried to write in a language that didn't belong to this world. The longer I stared, the harder it was to look away. The marks seemed to move when I blinked, like they were shifting just under the surface. My stomach twisted. I covered it back up with dirt and climbed out fast, breathing hard. I told myself I'd just imagined it. Maybe it was old damage from a tool, or roots pressed into the rock over time. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark soil, the strange carvings, the hollow space beneath me. I kept thinking, what if it wasn't just empty? What if it was waiting for something? The next morning, I went back early. I needed to make sure it was still there, that I hadn't dreamed it. But when I reached the eastern edge, the grave was gone. Completely filled, smooth surface like it had never been touched. The dirt was packed tight, flat as the others. No sign of the hole, no footprints, nothing. I stood there for a long time, too scared to move. The silence around me was heavier than usual. Even the crows stayed away. I walked to the nearest gravestone and checked the name, Mr. Gerald Pike, buried in 1987, right beside the spot where the empty grave had been. I'd cleaned his headstone 100 times, but now there was something new beneath his name. Fresh soil clung to the stone's lower edge, and just below it, scratched into the granite, were those same markings I'd seen the day before. I don't remember leaving the cemetery. I just remember the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My hands shaking so badly I dropped my shovel on the way out. That night, I locked the gates and told myself I wouldn't go back. Not for a few days, at least. But by morning, I got a call from the priest. He said someone had complained. Said there was a smell near the eastern fence. A rotting smell. When I went back, the air hit me like a slap. It was thick, sour, the kind of stench that sticks in your throat. The ground near where the grave had been was dark and wet. I grabbed my shovel again, though I didn't want to. It only took 2 scoops before I saw it. Fabric. A torn piece of black cloth. Then a pale shape beneath it. Skin. My heart stopped. I thought it was a body. An unrecorded burial, maybe a homeless person someone dumped there in the night. But when I cleared the dirt away, I froze. It wasn't a whole body. It was just an arm. And it was old. The skin was dry, almost gray, but the hand looked strange, like it had been reaching upward before it was buried, and on the wrist, carved deep into the flesh, were those same symbols. I couldn't breathe. I dropped the shovel and stumbled back. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, like the ground didn't want to let me go. I swear I heard something beneath me then, a soft, shifting sound like someone turning over in their sleep. The dirt moved. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. I told the priest. He called the police. They came, dug up the area, looked around. But when they finished, they said there was nothing there. No body, no cloth, no markings, just dirt. They looked at me like I was losing it. Maybe I was. For the next few weeks, I tried to forget it. I kept my head down, focused on my work, avoided that part of the grounds. But sometimes, when I walked near the east fence, I could feel something watching me from below. The soil there never stayed settled. It was always softer than it should be. Last night, I went out there again. I don't even know why. Maybe I needed to see it one more time, to prove it wasn't all in my head. When I reached the spot, there was no mound, no grave, just the same old ground. But sticking up through the grass was a single wooden marker, a name burned into it with shaky letters, Edwin Coleman. That's my name. The earth beneath it looked freshly dug, and when I leaned closer, I swear I heard something move down there, something slow, breathing, waiting. I left the cemetery before sunrise. I haven't gone back since. But every night, when the wind shifts and the ground outside my window trembles just a little, I can smell the dirt again. Wet, cold, waiting. like the grave isn't empty anymore. Like it never was. I still remember the way she looked when she first came to the cemetery. It was early morning, mist rolling low, the kind that makes every sound echo just a bit too long. She stood at the gate in a faded gray coat, holding a bouquet of white lilies so tight the stems snapped in her hands. Her name was Marjorie Heller. Everyone in town knew her. Everyone also knew what had happened to her son, Daniel Heller, 16, quiet, the kind of boy who looked like he was always thinking about something he couldn't quite explain. He'd drowned in the river behind the mill 3 months earlier. No one really knew why he'd gone there that night. Some said it was an accident. Some whispered other things. But Marjorie never said much. She just buried him and stopped coming to church. Until that morning, she asked for me by name. "You're the caretaker, right?" she said. Her voice was small but sharp, like it had been filed down by too much crying. I told her yes. She looked past me, toward the hill where the newer graves were. "I need you to open my son's grave," she said. I thought I'd misheard her. "People make strange requests here sometimes. Some want to move flowers, others want to check for keepsakes, but never that." I asked her why. "Because he's not in there," she said. "You buried someone else." There was no anger in her tone, just certainty, like she'd already seen something the rest of us hadn't. I told her gently that wasn't possible. The records were clear. Her son's coffin was placed and sealed by the undertaker himself. I was there. I helped lower it. I remember because she'd stood beside the grave until everyone else left, whispering something I couldn't hear. But she didn't blink. "You buried him twice," she said. "And the one lying there now isn't my boy." I didn't know what to say. I offered to walk her to the grave, maybe help her tidy it up, but she shook her head. "I'll wait until dark," she whispered. "I don't want anyone watching. I should have told her to go home. I should have called her family or the priest or someone, but something in her eyes made me stay quiet. Grief does strange things to people, and sometimes the dead don't stay buried the way we think they do. That night, I stayed late. I told myself it was to lock up, but truthfully, I wanted to see if she'd come back. She did. Around midnight, I saw the beam of a lantern moving up the hill, slow and unsteady. I followed, careful not to startle her. The air was cold enough to make my breath look like smoke. When I got closer, I saw her kneeling beside her son's grave, a small shovel beside her, hands shaking. "Mrs. Heller," I said softly, "you shouldn't be here." She didn't look at me. Her fingers were pressed against the soil, trembling. "It's warm," she said. "What?" "The ground," she whispered. "It's warm." "Feel it?" I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I knelt beside her and touched the dirt. She was right. The soil was soft, damp, and warm like someone had just been lying there. That shouldn't have been possible. It was nearly freezing out and the earth should have been solid. I pulled my hand back. "Maybe there's something under it," I said, trying to sound calm. "An animal or—" "No," she said quickly. "He's trying to get out again." I felt my chest tighten. "Again?" She nodded, her eyes wide and glassy in the lantern light. "The first time they buried him here. But 2 days later, I heard knocking under my floor. Just faint, but steady. I thought I was losing my mind, but then the smell started. Wet dirt, river mud. I followed it to his room." She stopped, her voice cracking. "His shoes were there, muddy, but I'd buried him in them. I wanted to walk away. I wanted to believe it was just grief eating her alive. But I'd heard things too over the years. Strange things. The cemetery has a memory longer than any of us. She started digging then, slowly, weakly, and I didn't stop her. I don't know why. Maybe I thought she needed to see the truth to quiet whatever storm had taken root in her head. The shovel made dull thuds against the dirt. The deeper she went, the heavier the air became. There was a faint humming, almost like a tune carried by the wind. At first I thought it was her humming, but she wasn't. Her lips were pressed tight. When the shovel hit something solid, she froze. We both did. It was the coffin lid. I felt my heart pound in my throat. I told her to stop, that we should call someone, but she shook her head. "Just one look," she said. "I need to know." Before I could argue, she pried the lid open. The smell hit us first. Stale, metallic, like wet wood and decay. I covered my mouth, waiting for the sight I'd seen 100 times before, but there was nothing inside. No body, no remains. Just the same white suit her son had been buried in, folded neatly, as if someone had taken it off and left it behind. She made a sound then. Not quite a scream, not quite a sob. Just a small, broken noise that didn't sound human. I wanted to close the coffin, to bury it again and pretend none of it had happened. But she reached into the empty space and pulled out something small, a lily stem. Wilted, wet, with soil. It was the same kind of flower she'd brought that morning. "He came home," she said softly. "But they made me bury him again. I didn't understand." "Who?" "The ones who watch from the trees," she whispered. "They came the night he knocked. Said he wasn't meant to be here. Said I had to put him back. So I did." She turned to me then, tears streaking her dirt-covered face. "But now he's gone again. They took him somewhere else. Somewhere I can't reach." The air around us felt heavier by the second. I swear the ground trembled beneath my knees like something shifting deep below. The lantern flickered. For a moment I thought I saw movement, shadows writhing under the soil, as if the earth itself was breathing. I grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "We have to go." She didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the empty coffin. "Listen," she said. I did. There was a sound coming from below us. Faint, rhythmic, knocking 3 times. Pause. 3 times again. Her face broke into a trembling smile. "He's still there," she whispered. "He's still trying." I dragged her away, half carrying her down the hill. She screamed, begged me to stop, to let her stay. When we reached the gate, she collapsed to the ground, sobbing. I called the police. By the time they came, the coffin was gone. Not just closed, gone. The hole was filled, packed perfectly, like it had never been touched. They thought we'd imagined it. Said we were tired, delusional. Said the dirt had been disturbed before by an animal, maybe. But I saw the look on the officer's face when he touched the soil. He felt the warmth, too. Marjorie stopped speaking after that night. They said she moved to her sister's house in the next town. I never saw her again. But sometimes people say they see a woman in gray standing by the gate after midnight, holding flowers that never wilt. 2 weeks ago, I was fixing a fence near the old section when I saw something strange. A small patch of lilies growing where Daniel's grave used to be. Only his grave isn't there anymore. It was never marked, and the land records show no plot in his name. But the flowers, those lilies, were warm to the touch, like sunlight had been trapped beneath them, and when I bent down, I swear I heard it again, that faint knocking, somewhere deep below the soil. I don't go near that part of the cemetery now. Some nights, though, when the wind dies and the ground feels too still, I think about her words. They made me bury him again. I wonder who they were. And I wonder how many times a mother can dig her son's grave before he finally stays gone. Sometimes I dream of her standing there, Marjorie in her gray coat, lilies in her hand, staring at the ground like she's waiting for something to crawl back through it. And when I wake, I always hear it. 3 knocks, pause. 3 knocks again, soft, patient, waiting beneath the floorboards of my room. I haven't opened the door to the yard since, because some graves, I've learned, don't belong to the dead. They belong to the living who keep digging them. There's a certain kind of quiet that only exists in graveyards after midnight. It's not peaceful, it's heavy. It presses on your ears until you start to hear things that might not even be there. I've learned to live with that kind of quiet. But ever since Marjorie Heller left, it's been worse. The cemetery feels different now. The air doesn't move right. The trees don't creak the same. Sometimes I'll be walking between the headstones and swear I hear someone keeping pace with me just half a step behind. When I stop, it stops. When I breathe, it breathes. It started about a week after we found that empty coffin. At first, I thought it was just my nerves. Too many sleepless nights. Too many things I couldn't explain. But then, the voice came. The first time I heard it, I was locking the main gate. The fog had rolled in thick, crawling over the ground like smoke. I could barely see 5 feet ahead. That's when I heard it. soft, almost playful, a child's laugh. I froze. It echoed through the fog, bouncing off the stone walls like it was circling me. It wasn't loud, just enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I called out, something like, "Hello?" Or, "Is someone there?" But my voice sounded small. Swallowed up. The laugh came again. Closer this time, I turned toward the sound and saw a faint shape between the trees. Small, no taller than a child. I thought maybe one of the neighborhood kids had snuck in. It happened sometimes, though never this late. I stepped forward, lantern in hand, calling again. "Hey, it's not safe here. You need to go home." The figure didn't move. It just stood there, half hidden in the fog. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't standing on the ground. It was standing in it. The soil around its legs was disturbed, like it had risen up from beneath. That's when my body decided to move before my brain could stop it. I turned and ran. I didn't look back until I was inside the caretaker's shed with the door locked and the lantern shaking in my hand. I told myself I'd imagined it. That my mind was playing tricks, piecing together the mist and shadows into something that wasn't real. But the next morning, I found footprints near the eastern fence. Small ones, barefoot, leading straight toward the spot where the Heller boys' grave used to be. That afternoon, I filled the prints in. I packed the dirt tight, just like before. That night, they came back. I know because I watched them form. I couldn't sleep, so I sat by the window in the shed, staring out toward the hill. The moonlight hit the ground just right, silvering everything. That's when I saw the dirt shift. Slow at first, like it was breathing. Then, one by one, prints began to appear. Small, careful, as if someone invisible was walking straight toward me. I didn't move. I just sat there, barely breathing, watching the earth bend under steps I couldn't see. They stopped a few feet from the shed door. The air went still. Then came the sound, soft knocking. 3 times. Pause. 3 times again. That same pattern I'd heard before. I wanted to yell, to demand whatever it was to leave. But no sound came out. The knocking stopped after a minute. The silence that followed was somehow worse. In the morning, the door was clean. No mud, no marks, nothing. But there was something new just beyond the porch, half buried in the dirt. A marble toy, one of those old ones kids used to play with, cloudy and green. I picked it up and almost dropped it right away. It was warm. I kept it, though I don't know why. Maybe because part of me hoped it meant something else. Maybe I just didn't want to believe what I already knew. The next few nights, it kept happening. The laughter, the knocking, sometimes whispers that sounded like a child talking to someone just outside the window. I started hearing my name too. Not shouted, not even clearly spoken, just breathed. Like someone was practicing saying it under their breath. Edwin, always in that soft, broken voice that never rose above a whisper. I began sleeping less, if at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of dirt shifting, of a small hand pushing through the soil, of a child's face looking up from beneath the ground, eyes open, lips moving like he was trying to speak. I'd wake with my mouth full of the taste of dirt. One evening, after 3 nights of no sleep, I decided to follow the sound. I thought if I saw it for real, if I proved it to myself, I could put an end to the madness. The air was cold enough to sting when I breathed. My lantern light stretched long shadows across the gravestones as I walked. The laughter started near the back wall, faint but unmistakable. "Danny!" I said before I realized it. I don't know why. The name just slipped out. The laughter stopped. I waited, the silence pulling tight like a string about to snap. Then came the whisper. Right behind me this time. "Mom says you shouldn't have filled it." I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the lantern. Nothing there. Just fog curling around the headstones. My heartbeat drowned out every other sound. I walked backward toward the shed, eyes scanning every corner, every patch of mist. And that's when I saw it again, the small figure standing in the distance, watching. Only this time, it wasn't between the trees. It was by the fence, right where I'd buried the Heller boys' empty grave the first time. I called out, voice shaking. "What do you want?" The figure tilted its head. For a second, I thought it was smiling. Then it lifted one arm, thin, pale, and pointed down at the ground. At its feet, the soil was moving again. Slowly sinking, like something beneath was pulling it open. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just ran. Back in the shed, I locked the door and dragged the cabinet in front of it. I sat with my back against the wall until the lantern burned out. The knocking came again, 3 times. Pause, 3 times, and a soft voice whispered, almost playful, "Let him out." I don't remember falling asleep. But when I woke, sunlight was already pouring in through the cracks. The shed door stood wide open. The cabinet had been pushed aside, not violently, but neatly, carefully. I walked outside. The footprints were back, fresh in the mud, leading from the fence straight to my door, and back again. That same morning, I went to the priest. I told him everything, every sound, every voice, every dream. He listened quietly, hands folded. When I finished, he didn't laugh. He just said, "You've been keeping too many things buried, son." He didn't mean just the graves. That night, I found the marble again. I'd left it on the windowsill, but now it sat on my pillow. And this time there were 2 of them. When I picked them up, something clicked. A faint rattle. They weren't marbles at all. They were eyes. Small glass ones, the kind used in children's dolls. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I threw them out into the dark, but I could still hear them clattering softly against the stones long after they should have stopped. Now, every night feels the same. The fog, the laughter, the knocking, always in the same rhythm. Sometimes it sounds like it's coming from underground, sometimes from inside the walls. Last night, though, it changed. It wasn't just one voice anymore. There were 2. A woman's and a child's, whispering together outside the shed. I pressed my ear to the door, and for the first time, I could make out what they were saying. The boy said, "He filled it again." And the woman answered, "Then he knows what he has to do." I didn't sleep after that. I just sat in the corner with the lantern burning low, staring at the floor, waiting for the light to die. I don't know if what I've heard is real anymore. Maybe grief spreads like rot, one grave at a time. Maybe it seeps into the soil until it finds another heart to live in. All I know is tonight the air feels the same as it did that first night. Too still, too warm. The fog is already rising, crawling through the grass like it's looking for something, and just now, outside the window, I can see them. 2 sets of footprints this time. Small, bare, side by side. They stop right at my door. The knocking begins again, 3 times. Pause. 3 times more. But this time, I don't move, because I already know what comes next. A voice, soft and familiar, whispering through the cracks. "Let him out." "Edwin, it's your turn to dig." And as the sound fades, I can hear the dirt shifting just outside, slow, steady, like someone, or something, is making room for me. I used to think the cemetery was just dirt and stone. Nothing more. Nothing less. A place for endings, but lately, it feels alive, like the ground itself is thinking, breathing, watching. After the voices started, I stopped sleeping in the caretaker's shed. I moved into the church basement instead, thinking maybe the walls would feel safer. But safety doesn't mean anything when the thing you're hiding from knows your name. Every night I still heard it. The knocking. 3 times. Pause. 3 more. Sometimes faint. Sometimes so close it felt like it was inside the walls. I told myself I wouldn't go back to the east fence. But 2 days ago, the priest asked me to check the ground again. He said someone had been leaving flowers there, fresh ones, every night. I didn't tell him I already knew. I'd seen them too, white lilies, same as the ones Marjorie Heller used to bring. Only now they were planted in neat rows. 6 of them. Perfectly straight. That morning, I brought my shovel. I didn't plan to dig. I just wanted to look, to see if maybe the soil had settled, or if the tracks had come back. But when I got there, the ground was uneven again. Not freshly dug, not soft, but rippled, like something underneath had moved and the dirt hadn't quite resettled. I tried to walk away. I really did, but the ground made a sound, a faint cracking noise, like bone under pressure. I dropped to my knees and brushed the dirt aside. Beneath the surface, something pale peeked through, a thin white curve that looked almost like a stick. At first, I thought it was an animal bone. Happens all the time. Dogs, rabbits, birds. The cemetery is full of life feeding off death. But when I dug a little deeper, I saw it wasn't an animal. It was a rib, small, human, and right beside it, another, and another. I stopped counting after 7. My breath came in short, hard gasps. I sat back, staring at the ground like it was a wound that wouldn't close. It didn't make sense. The grave that used to be there belonged to one child. One, but the bones, there were too many. I should have stopped. I should have filled the dirt back and walked away. Instead, I kept digging. The soil grew darker the deeper I went, wet and heavy. I found more ribs, small vertebrae, pieces of skulls so fragile they cracked beneath my fingers. Not one skeleton, but several, all tangled together. There was something wrong about the way they lay. Not buried neatly, thrown, piled, like someone had been trying to hide them fast, and underneath it all, near the bottom, I found something else. A hand. Small. Child-sized, but it wasn't bone. It was fresh. The skin was pale and stretched tight, like it hadn't had time to rot. The nails were clean. The wrist was marked with symbols, those same carved lines I'd seen before, the ones I'd tried to convince myself weren't real. I dropped the shovel. I couldn't breathe. My mind was screaming that this couldn't be happening, that this couldn't exist. I stepped back, and that's when I saw movement. The soil near the hand shifted, rising slightly, as if something underneath was pressing up. The fingers twitched. I fell backward, scrambling in the dirt. The air felt thick, heavy. My head was pounding. The sound came again, the knocking. Not from the shed this time. From the ground, 3 times. Pause, 3 times, then silence. I ran. I don't even remember how I got back to the church. The priest said I looked gray, like I'd seen a ghost. Maybe I had. I told him everything, about the bones, the hand, the symbols. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "You've unearthed what should have been left alone." He left the room after that. I heard him praying behind the chapel door, words too low to understand. That night, I locked myself inside. But the air in the basement smelled wrong. Wet earth, mold, decay. I couldn't stand it. I thought maybe I'd brought the scent back on my clothes, but it was stronger than that. It was coming from beneath the floor. I lifted one of the boards. The dirt underneath was damp and warm, and buried there, pressed into the soil, was a single white lily. I couldn't move. My whole body went numb. I didn't sleep that night, or the one after. The smell kept getting worse, the knocking louder. Every time I tried to leave, I'd hear a child's voice behind me, soft and curious, saying the same words. Why did you dig it up? By the 3rd night, I couldn't take it anymore. I went back to the east fence. I thought maybe if I put the dirt back properly, if I fixed it, it would stop. The moon was full. The fog had that strange glow it gets when the air feels too still. The ground where I dug was flat again, like someone had already covered it. I almost turned back, but then I saw something sticking out from the soil, a piece of cloth. It looked like the corner of a burial shroud. I pulled it free, and as I did, a rush of warm air hit my face. The smell of the earth was sweet and rotten. I gagged. The cloth tore, revealing what was underneath. A skull, but smaller than it should have been. The jaw was missing, the eye sockets uneven. It looked wrong, like it had been pieced together from different bones that didn't belong, and when I touched it, it crumbled. Inside was something black and soft, like ash that hadn't cooled. I dropped it. I wanted to run, but the ground wouldn't let me. My feet sank an inch into the soil, like something beneath had taken hold. Then came the voices, dozens of them, children, whispering, laughing, crying. Too many, they said. Too many to fit. The dirt began to shift, moving like waves. Small hands pushed up through it, some whole, some only bone. Dozens of them, reaching, grasping at the air. I stumbled back, shouting for them to stop, but they didn't hear me. They never do. I tripped over the shovel, fell hard, and when I looked up, the figures were gone. The soil was still again, perfectly flat, except for one thing. A small shape sat on top of the dirt, a rib bone placed neatly. And carved into it, faint but clear, were words. You shouldn't have counted. I don't remember walking back. I just remember the feeling that the ground was moving under me, pulsing like a heartbeat. When I got inside, I scrubbed my hands until they bled, but I couldn't get the smell of the earth off. It's still there. It never leaves. The priest came by this morning. He looked tired. I think he knows something he won't say. He asked if I'd seen anything strange. I told him everything again. He listened quietly, then said, "They buried them under the wrong names. The town did what it had to. Some things aren't meant to be remembered." He wouldn't look me in the eye after that. Now I sit here, writing this, trying to convince myself it's over. But I know it isn't. Because outside the window, the ground is moving again. The lilies I dug up have sprouted overnight, 6 of them taller now, their petals black at the edges, and right in the middle of them the soil is cracking. Slowly, quietly, something underneath is pressing up. I can hear the knocking again. 3 times. Pause. 3 times. And this time it isn't from the ground. It's coming from the wall behind me. I turn and the plaster trembles. "Dust falls?" The knocking continues. Faster now, impatient. I back away, heart pounding until I see it. A small, pale hand pushing through the wall. The fingers are dirty. The wrist is carved with symbols. It's the same hand I saw in the dirt. Only now, it's still moving. And as it reaches toward me, I finally understand what the priest meant. They weren't buried under the wrong names. They were never buried at all. The ground only covered them for a while, and now it's giving them back. I've been a detective in this town for 12 years, long enough to see the quiet rot that hides beneath polite smiles and painted fences. But nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever made me feel the way those missing dates did. It started 3 weeks ago. The cemetery sits on the edge of town, down a road no one really uses anymore. The sign that says Everpine Memorial Grounds is so faded it looks like it's trying to disappear. I used to drive past it almost every day, never giving it much thought. Graves are just part of the landscape here, like the old trees that never lose their shadows. But that morning, the caretaker, an old man named Henry, called me before sunrise. His voice was trembling. Said something about vandalism. I almost didn't answer. My wife was still asleep beside me, and for a moment, I thought of pretending I didn't hear it. But duty's a hard habit to break. When I got there, Henry was standing near the southern row of graves, his lantern flickering in the mist. The air was cold enough to bite, and the fog hung low, almost touching the stones. He didn't say a word, just pointed. That's when I saw it. Every headstone in that row, maybe 20 of them, had their dates scraped clean. The names were still there. The little messages carved underneath were untouched, but the birth and death dates, gone. Like someone had erased time itself. The marks were deep. Not like a kid with a knife. Whoever did it had used something stronger. A chisel, maybe. But there were no footprints. No tire tracks. No signs of forced entry on the gates. Just the wind whispering through the fog and those smooth, blank spaces where years used to be. Henry swore he locked up the night before. He said he'd walked through at sunset, same as always, and everything was fine. He's been doing that job longer than I've been alive. He wouldn't miss something like that. I took pictures, made notes, tried to sound confident. But inside, I already felt something off. Like I was standing too close to something I shouldn't be seeing. Over the next few days, the reports kept coming. First another row, then another. By the end of the week, almost half the cemetery's graves had been stripped of their dates. Always overnight, always with no signs of entry. The local paper ran a small piece about it. Vandal Target Cemetery, they called it. They used one of my photos, a shot of a stone where you could still see the faint outline of the years. 1893, 1951. Except now it was just a long, shallow scar across cold marble. People started whispering about ghosts, of course. Small towns like ours always jump straight to superstition when something strange happens. Henry said it might be them coming back. I laughed when he said it, but there was no humor in it. A few nights later, I decided to stake out the place. I parked my car behind the caretaker's shed and waited. The moon was high, pale as bone, and the whole place looked washed out. You could almost forget what it was, if not for the rows of stones stretching into the dark like teeth. I waited hours. Nothing. Just the sound of crickets and my own heartbeat. Around 3, I dozed off. When I woke up, the fog had rolled in again, thick and silent. My breath came out in little clouds. I rubbed my eyes, stepped out of the car, and nearly dropped my flashlight. The graves right in front of me, the ones I'd been watching all night, were changed. The dates were gone. I swear to God, I didn't hear a thing. No footsteps. No scraping. Nothing. Just gone. I remember walking between them, running my fingers over the stone. The marble felt warm somehow, almost like skin. The air was still and heavy, and I could hear my pulse in my ears. I thought maybe I was dreaming or losing my mind. That's when I saw it. One stone had something carved into it, not by a machine, not even neatly, but by hand. Rough, uneven letters that looked almost desperate. It said, "Not your time." I stood there for what felt like hours, just staring at those words. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement behind the graves, a dark shape slipping between them. But when I swung the light, there was nothing. Just fog. I didn't tell anyone about that. Not even the chief. I said I must have missed the vandal somehow. Maybe he slipped out through the woods. I filed the report and went home. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that blank marble, those missing years, that message carved like a warning. And somewhere in the dark, I kept hearing that sound, like a chisel-biting stone, slow and steady. 2 days later, the dates came back. I'm not kidding. Henry called again, crying this time. Said the stones were healed. When I got there, every one of them had the dates back. Clear, perfect, untouched. Same numbers, same engraving style. Except they looked newer, like they'd just been carved that morning. I asked around. The engraver in town swore he hadn't been there. The gates were locked all night. No one saw anything. Henry told me something that made my blood run cold. He said the dates weren't all the same. Some had changed. For example, one man, Thomas Ellis, had died in 1948. His new stone said 1951. Another said 1976 instead of 1973. Tiny shifts. Just a few years here and there, but enough to notice. Enough to feel wrong. I checked the town records, and he was right. The new dates didn't match any official records. By then, I'd stopped trying to make sense of it. I told myself maybe it was a prank or a mistake, or maybe Henry was just getting old and confused. But deep down I knew. I could feel it. Something was rewriting itself. A week passed without more incidents. The papers moved on. So did most people. But I didn't. I couldn't. I kept thinking about those new dates, those stolen years. Where did they go? Who did they belong to? Then something happened that tore the last bit of normal out of my life. I went back to the cemetery one evening to check on Henry. The sun was setting and the air smelled like rain. I found him standing near the grave he'd dug for his wife 40 years ago. He looked pale, shaking. He pointed at the stone. Her name was still there. But the dates, those cursed dates, had changed again. She'd been born in 1929, died in 1993. Now it said 1929 to 2025. I didn't say a word. Henry fell to his knees crying. Said she'd been calling his name in his dreams, asking him to come home. He died 3 nights later. Heart attack, they said. But when I went to his funeral, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. His new headstone, just placed that morning, had perfect, polished numbers. Except for one thing. The death date was blank. It's been 4 days since then, and I can't stop thinking about it. I've been having dreams, too. I see the cemetery, but it's not empty anymore. The fog moves like it's alive, whispering things I can't quite understand. Sometimes I see Henry standing there, carving something into the stones. Other times I see myself. This morning, I went to check my own family plot, just to prove to myself I'm losing it. But when I got there, my name was already on one of the stones. The birth year was right. The death date was gone and carved underneath in small, uneven letters. It said the same thing I saw that night in the fog. Not your time. Now I don't know what's happening anymore. Maybe it's some curse. Maybe time's coming undone. Maybe the ground itself remembers us better than we remember it. But every night I hear that sound again, slow scraping, like something carving through stone. It's getting closer, and I think maybe it's finally making room for me. I've been a detective in this town for over a decade, long enough to know that evil doesn't always look like blood or violence. Sometimes it hides in silence, in places meant to be peaceful, like a cemetery. It began 3 weeks ago. The call came before dawn. The caretaker, Henry, said there'd been damage to the graves. His voice cracked like a radio signal. I almost told him to wait till morning, but something in the way. He said they're gone made me pull on my coat and drive out there. Everpine Cemetery sits at the far edge of town, where the road narrows and the trees lean too close. The fog was thick when I got there, pressing against the windshield like breath. Henry was waiting near the gate, lantern in hand, face pale and wet from the mist. He didn't say a word. Just pointed. The graves in the southern row, maybe 20 of them, had all been carved clean. The names were still there, the stones still smooth, but the birth and death dates were gone. Just blank, pale marble where time used to be. I crouched down, ran my gloved fingers across the surface. It wasn't vandalism. The markings were too precise. Each number had been scraped away with care, as if someone wanted to erase the idea of when these people existed. No footprints, no wheel marks, no broken gate or missing tools. Just the whisper of wind through tall grass and the faint smell of iron in the air. Henry muttered, "They didn't like their dates," and crossed himself. I ignored it at first. Took pictures, filed the report, told him it was probably kids. But when I drove home that morning, I couldn't shake the image of those smooth, empty stones, like the dead were trying to forget themselves. By the next night, more dates were gone. Another section of graves wiped clean, then 2 more rows the night after, always at night, always with no signs of entry. We checked for animals, checked for people, even put up a camera. Nothing. The footage would glitch between midnight and 3, like something had passed through the lens that it couldn't capture. People in town started talking. Some said it was a ghost, others said it was a message. Henry said it was a correction. I laughed, but it didn't sound like me. 3 nights later, I decided to stay. I parked near the caretaker's shed with the headlights off, windows cracked just enough to hear the wind. The moon hung low, the sky gray like ash. Hours passed. Nothing moved. My coffee went cold. Then, sometime after 2, I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes, everything felt wrong. The fog was thicker, almost alive, sliding across the ground like it was searching for something. I got out of the car, flashlight in hand, and froze. The graves right in front of me, the ones I had been staring at before I fell asleep, were blank. The dates had vanished again. No sound, no movement, just gone. I ran my hand across one of them, and it felt warm. Not the way stone should feel. Warm like skin. I remember pulling back, shaking, trying to breathe. Then I noticed something new carved beneath one of the names. Rough letters, uneven, like they'd been done in a hurry. Not your time. I don't remember leaving. I just remember the sound my boots made against the gravel and the weight of that message repeating in my head. The next morning, I told myself it was a trick of the light. Maybe someone had been there. Maybe I missed them. But deep down, I knew better. A few days later, Henry called again. Said the dates had come back. I didn't believe him until I saw it. Every stone was restored. Same names, same spacing, but the numbers were different. Slightly off. A man who died in 1946 now read 1952. A woman who died in 1989 now said 1991. Tiny changes, but they meant something. When I checked the official records, the original death dates were still correct. These new ones existed only on the stones. Henry said the ground had rewritten itself. He said he heard whispering under the soil at night, like someone counting. That's when I stopped laughing. I went back alone the next evening, walking between the rows with my flashlight. The fog clung to my legs, and every breath felt heavy. I kept hearing faint scraping sounds, like metal on stone, but every time I turned, the sound stopped. At one point, I knelt beside a child's grave. Her name was Emily Rhodes. The inscription said she died at age 6, except now it said age 8. I felt something under my palm then, just the faintest vibration, like a heartbeat coming from the ground. I dropped my light, stumbled back, and the sound stopped. That was the night I decided I wanted off the case. But the chief said there was no one else. Said it was just stone and paranoia. I stopped sleeping. 2 nights later, Henry called one last time. His voice was barely a whisper. He said, "They're fixing mine now." When I got there, he was standing in front of his wife's grave, lanterns shaking in his hand. She died decades ago, but the dates had changed. Her death year had shifted from 1993 to 2025. He looked at me like a man already gone, said she'd been calling to him, said she was waiting. He died that weekend. Heart failure, they said. At his funeral, I walked past the rows of stones and forced myself to look at his new marker. The letters were perfect. Too perfect. His birth date was there. His death date wasn't. Just blank space. That night, I started hearing things outside my window. The sound of metal scraping against rock, steady and patient. Sometimes I think it's in my head, but sometimes it feels closer. Yesterday, I went back to the cemetery one final time. I told myself it was to finish the report, but that was a lie. I needed to know if it had spread. When I reached the caretaker's shed, I saw a new headstone leaning against the wall, still waiting to be placed. My flashlight hit the surface, and my stomach dropped. It was mine. My full name. My birth year. The rest was empty, and beneath it, in those same rough, uneven letters, someone had carved, "Not your time." I don't know how long I stood there. The wind picked up, cold and hollow. I swear I heard someone breathing behind me. I turned, but there was only fog. I keep the report locked in my drawer now. Every night I tell myself it's just madness, just a trick of fear and sleep deprivation. But when I close my eyes, I see those dates shifting again. Sometimes I think the dead don't stay where we put them. Maybe they're still counting the years we've stolen from them. And maybe, when they've had enough, they come to take them back. I've been a detective in this town for 12 years, and I thought I'd seen every kind of strange. Faked hauntings, cult graffiti, even the occasional grave robber. But this was something else. It started one morning when the cemetery caretaker called before sunrise. Henry's voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand him. He kept saying, "They took the years." When I got to Everpine Cemetery, the fog was so thick it felt alive. Henry was standing near the southern fence, clutching a lantern like it was the only thing keeping him from disappearing. He didn't say a word, just pointed. I followed the light to a row of headstones. At first I thought the mist was playing tricks on me, but then I leaned closer. Every headstone had been carved clean, names still there, messages still there. But the birth and death dates, gone, completely erased, as if they'd never existed, not chipped or smashed, but scraped smooth, like someone had carefully sanded time itself away. I remember crouching down, running my hand along the cold stone. The marble was smooth as skin. It wasn't vandalism, it was deliberate, surgical. No footprints, no tool marks, no sign of anyone forcing the gate, just silence. I asked Henry when he'd last checked the grounds. He said sunset, said everything was fine. He's old, but he doesn't forget details. He told me, "Something walked through here last night and it wasn't a man. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. I took photos, wrote my report, tried to sound professional, but all the while I couldn't stop staring at those blank stones. It felt like I was standing in a place where time had gone missing. Over the next few days, more graves changed. First 1 row, then 3. By the end of the week, half the cemetery had lost its dates. Always overnight, always without a trace. We put up cameras. Every single one glitched out between midnight and 3. The footage was just static and shapes that looked like shadows trying to form faces. Henry started talking to himself when he worked. He said the ground was whispering, correcting the record. I thought he was losing it. But I wasn't sleeping well either. Every night I'd wake up at 3:11 a.m. sharp, heart pounding, the sound of metal scraping in my ears. So I decided to stay one night. I parked near the caretaker's shed and waited. The fog rolled in early, wrapping the trees like wet cloth. My flashlight barely cut through it. Hours passed. Nothing. Just the sound of crickets and the occasional creak of old wood. Around 3, I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes, the air felt different. Still, heavy. I stepped out of the car. The graves in front of me, ones I'd been watching all night, were blank. The dates were gone. No sound. No movement. Just absence. And then I saw something carved where the numbers used to be. Small, uneven letters, like they'd been scratched by a trembling hand. Not your time. I remember my flashlight flickering, the mist curling closer. I thought I saw someone standing by the tree line, a shape that almost looked human. But when I blinked, it was gone. I didn't tell anyone about that, not even the chief. Just filed the report and pretended it was vandalism. But the next morning, Henry called again, said the dates had come back. I thought he was joking until I saw it myself. The same stones, the same engravings, all restored. But the numbers weren't right. Some people had died a few years later than before. One man who'd passed in 1948 now said 1951. Another jumped from 1972 to 1975. Tiny differences, but they made my skin crawl. I checked town records. The old death certificates were unchanged, which meant the stones were lying, or something else was. I asked Henry if he'd done the recarving. He swore he hadn't touched a thing. Said the stones fixed themselves. That was when he started to look sick. Pale, eyes sunken. Said his wife had been talking to him in dreams. She died decades ago. He told me she kept saying, "It's almost time." 3 days later, he was gone. Heart failure, they said. When I went to his funeral, I couldn't stop staring at his headstone. The marble was fresh, white as bone. His birth year was there, but where the death date should have been, just a blank space. The stonecutter said it was an oversight. I knew better. I went back to the cemetery that night, alone. The fog was thicker than ever. I walked the paths slowly, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the dark. The air smelled like rain and dust. That's when I noticed the new graves, ones that hadn't been there before. The dirt was still loose, the stones unmarked. I counted them, 8 in total. Something inside me told me not to touch them. But I did anyway. The soil was warm, and underneath it, I could feel stone. Smooth. Waiting. When I shined my light closer, I saw faint letters forming on one of the blank markers, like they were being carved from the inside out. Not your time. I ran then. Didn't even remember getting back to the car. It's been 2 nights since, and I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see those smooth graves, the fog curling like breath. I hear the slow scrape of a chisel in the dark. Yesterday, I went to check the cemetery records in the town hall, just to feel sane again. But when I opened the drawer with the death logs, every file was missing the same thing. The dates, births, deaths, all gone. Just empty lines. No one else seems to notice. I told myself to drop it, walk away, but I couldn't. Something kept pulling me back. So this morning, I went out there one last time. The sky was gray, rain starting to fall. The air felt heavy, like the whole world was holding its breath. I walked to the southern row. The fog lifted for a moment, and that's when I saw it. A new stone. My name. The birth year was right, the death date blank, and beneath it, carved so deep I could feel it even without touching, were those same words. Not your time. I don't know who's doing this. I don't know what is doing this, but I can feel it getting closer. Every night that scraping sound comes back, and I think maybe the graves aren't changing. Maybe we are. Maybe something's rewriting us, one date at a time. I never believed that weight could lie. When my mother died, the funeral home handed me a simple bronze urn. It was smooth, polished, and cold. The kind of cold that feels clean at first, until it seeps through your skin. They told me her ashes were inside, said the weight was normal. But the first thing I noticed was that it was too heavy. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, thanked them, and carried it to the car. The urn sat on the passenger seat as I drove home. Every bump in the road made it shift slightly, like it didn't want to stay still. At one point, I thought I heard something inside, just the faintest rattle like pebbles clicking together. Ashes don't rattle. I told myself it was nothing. Just the metal moving, or maybe the lid wasn't tight. But my hands kept gripping the steering wheel harder with every sound. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my knuckles were white. I placed it on the mantel, right above the fireplace. It looked strange there, too new, too shiny for a house that had forgotten what light felt like. My mother would have hated it. She always said metal made a home feel cold. I told myself it was fine, that the sound was my imagination. But that night when the house was quiet, I heard it again. A soft, deliberate clink, like something small had shifted inside. I tried to ignore it, but the sound didn't stop. It came every few minutes, soft, patient, almost rhythmic. I got up around 2 a.m., turned on the lamp and stared at the urn. It just sat there catching the light, still, silent. I almost laughed at myself. Maybe grief was making me hear things. The next morning I called the funeral home. I asked them about the sound, told them it felt heavier than it should. The man on the phone chuckled softly, said sometimes bits of bone don't burn down completely. You might be hearing small fragments, he told me, like it was supposed to comfort me. I thanked him, hung up, and tried to feel normal again. But later that day, when I was dusting the mantel, my hand brushed the urn and it moved. Not slid, shifted. Like something inside had pushed from the other side. I dropped the duster, stared at it. The surface was warm to the touch. I told myself I needed sleep. That grief can make your senses lie. But every night after that, I heard it. The rattle. The small, dry movement inside that didn't sound like ash or bone. Sometimes it was just one click. Other times it went on for minutes, faint and deliberate, like someone was turning something over and over. On the fourth night, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat on the couch across from the mantel with all the lights off, waiting. The house was quiet except for the sound of the fridge humming in the kitchen. Hours passed. My eyes started to sting. Then, I heard it. Not a click this time. A scrape. Metal against metal. It was coming from inside the urn. I didn't move. I just sat there staring, my heart thudding so loud I could feel it in my throat. The sound came again, sharper this time, like something dragging itself across the inside of the lid. I wanted to run, but I didn't. Instead, I got up and walked toward it, slow, like I was afraid of scaring it away. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe a bug had gotten in somehow. Maybe the metal was expanding in the heat. But when I touched it, the urn was ice cold. The sound stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then faintly, I heard something else. A soft tink, like glass hitting metal. I unscrewed the lid. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. The smell hit me first. Not smoke, not ashes. Something damp. Old. Like earth after rain, or something that had been buried too long. The ashes were dark gray, fine at first glance. But when I tilted the urn slightly, something shiny caught the light. I reached in carefully, my fingertips brushing through the dust until I touched something hard. I pulled it out. It was a tooth, not burnt, not cracked, whole, human. For a long time, I just stared at it. My mother had dentures for years. She didn't have any real teeth left. I knew that. I remembered helping her take them out before bed. So whoever this belonged to, it wasn't her. I dropped the tooth on the table and kept digging. There were more, not just teeth, small fragments of jewelry, twisted pieces of metal. A gold earring, a ring, bits of chain. It looked like someone had scooped a handful from a graveyard and sealed it inside. I wanted to throw it out, call someone, but all I could do was sit there staring at that dark pile. It didn't look like ashes anymore. It looked like something alive, something that had been hiding, waiting. That night I dreamed of fire. I saw faces in the smoke, blurred, melted, whispering without mouths. They were all wearing jewelry, their teeth glinting through the gray. And behind them stood my mother holding the urn. Her eyes were hollow. When I woke up, the lid was off. I don't remember opening it. I didn't touch it after that first time. The ashes were spread out across the table in a perfect circle. In the center sat the tooth. It looked clean now, polished, almost new. I swept everything back into the urn with shaking hands. But no matter how much I wiped, the circle stayed there. A pale ring like something had burned itself into the wood. I tried calling the funeral home again. The number was disconnected. I drove there the next morning. The building was empty. No sign, no furniture, nothing but a faint smell of smoke in the air, like it had been abandoned for years. When I got home, the urn wasn't on the mantel anymore. It was sitting on the floor by my bedroom door. There was ash on the carpet. Small gray footprints leading from the living room to where it stood. Tiny, bare, like a child's. I locked the door that night. Kept the urn outside in the yard, but I still heard it through the walls, through the dark. That soft clink, 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 like teeth tapping against metal. By morning, it was back on the mantel. I didn't touch it again for weeks. Then one day, I came home from work and noticed something different. The urn looked lighter, like some of the ashes were gone. I tilted it slightly and saw empty space near the top. I checked the floor. Nothing spilled. Nothing missing. That night, the dreams came back. I saw the same faces again, but closer this time. The whispers were louder. Put it back. I woke up sweating, the taste of ash in my mouth. When I looked in the mirror, I noticed something stuck between my teeth. Small, hard, white. A tooth. I dropped it, ran to the mantel, grabbed the urn, and I swear it felt lighter again, like it had taken something back. I don't sleep much now. Sometimes late at night I hear faint scratching from inside. Other times it's laughter, quiet, muffled, like someone laughing with their mouth closed. I tried burying it once, deep in the backyard. But the next morning it was back on the mantel, clean, polished, as if someone had wiped it down. There's something else, too. The jewelry pieces I pulled out, they're gone. I don't know when they disappeared, but one by one, they vanished. Now only one remains. A small gold ring, blackened on the edge. I looked at it closely the other day. Inside the band, there's a name scratched so faintly I almost missed it. It's my mother's name. But the handwriting, it's mine. I don't remember doing it. Sometimes I think about smashing the urn, but I can't. Every time I try to lift it, it feels heavier, like it's full of stone, or people, or memories I'm not supposed to have. It's sitting next to me right now. Quiet, but I can feel it watching, and I think I finally understand what the weight is. It's not the ashes, it's not the bones. It's everything they couldn't burn, everything that still remembers. I've worked in the funeral home for almost 7 years. It's not glamorous, but it's quiet, predictable. People die, families cry, and we make sure they're remembered properly. That's what I used to tell myself. That was before I started noticing the little things. It started one Thursday afternoon, the kind that drags on forever. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and carnations. Mr. Garrison, the funeral director, was in his office with the blinds closed. He never liked people interrupting him during arrangements. He said that was his private time where he dealt with the paperwork and the grieving families, but I rarely heard voices inside. Just the low hum of the old desk fan. That day, I was restocking the embalming room when I noticed a new shipment had come in, 3 pine caskets. No orders were logged for them. Usually, every casket had a name tag taped to the end. the deceased's name, age, and the date of service. These ones were blank. At first, I thought it was a mix-up. I even wrote a note to remind Mr. Garrison to update the logbook. But when I placed the note on his desk later that day, it was gone by the next morning. Not filed, not answered. Just gone, I let it go. You learn to look the other way in this line of work. A week later, a woman came in looking for her brother. He'd been missing for 2 months, she said. She'd heard the police had no leads, and she was trying every place she could think of. I remember how tired she looked, like she hadn't slept since he vanished. I told her we hadn't received anyone by that name. She thanked me, handed me a picture of him just in case, and left. I was about to throw it away, but something about his face stuck with me. 3 nights later, Mr. Garrison called me back to work late. Said we had a special service that needed to be prepared quietly before morning. He always used that word, quietly. When I came in, he was wearing gloves and had already started moving one of those unmarked caskets. He told me not to worry about paperwork, that this was a charitable case. Sometimes, he said, the county sends over the unclaimed bodies and pays us to cremate them. But when I looked at the body on the table, something didn't sit right. There was no tag, no record, no ID at all. Just a man in his mid-30s, face bruised, fingernails broken. I told him we couldn't cremate someone without documentation. He didn't look at me, just kept pushing the body toward the prep room. His voice was calm but sharp. Paperwork's been handled. You just do your job, so I did. For hours I worked in silence, my hands shaking slightly every time I caught sight of the bruises on the man's wrists. The cremation went through before dawn. The next morning, I checked the ledger out of habit. No entry, no name, no record of cremation. Nothing. That's when I remembered the woman's picture, the one of her missing brother. I dug it out of the drawer and stared at it under the light. The jawline, the haircut, even the little scar above the right eyebrow. It was him. My stomach dropped. I went to Mr. Garrison's office and asked about it. He didn't even let me finish. He just stared at me from behind those small round glasses, his hands folded neatly on the desk. You don't get paid to ask questions, he said. Then he smiled, just for a second, and it chilled me more than anything I'd ever seen. After that, I started watching him closely. He'd arrive after midnight some nights, headlights off, moving quietly through the back entrance. I'd hear the soft creak of the prep room door, the shuffle of heavy plastic. One night I stayed behind, hiding in the storeroom with the lights out. Around 2 a.m., I heard the van pull up. He got out, humming an old hymn under his breath, and rolled a stretcher inside. There was a body on it. He worked quickly, no hesitation, like it was second nature. The sheet slipped off for just a moment, and I saw duct tape around the wrists, not embalmed, not cleaned, fresh. I almost called the police right then, but something in me froze. You ever have that feeling where your whole body knows something before your mind does? That if you speak or move or breathe wrong, something terrible will happen to you. That's what it felt like. I waited until he was done. He placed the body in the furnace, locked the doors, and left. His van taillights disappeared down the road, and I stood there for maybe an hour, shaking, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. The next day, he acted like nothing had happened. We had 2 regular funerals scheduled, and he was calm, polite, even joking with the families. But I could see it. The faint smell of smoke still clinging to his clothes. The way he looked at the urns on the shelf like they were trophies. That evening, while he was distracted, I broke into the office. The filing cabinet had a false bottom. Inside were manila folders, dozens of them. No names, just codes and numbers. Each one had a single photo paper-clipped to the front. All missing persons. The hair on my arms stood up as I flipped through them. Men, women, kids, all local. At the bottom of the drawer was an envelope labeled Final Services. Inside were receipts, cash deposits from unknown accounts. I checked the dates. Every single one matched the nights I'd heard that van outside. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I just kept hearing that furnace door slamming shut in my head over and over. I told myself I'd quit the next morning. Call the police, tell them everything. But when I arrived, Mr. Garrison was already waiting by the door, sipping coffee like he always did. He said he wanted to talk about loyalty. I didn't answer. My hands were sweating. He stepped closer, still smiling. "You've been very helpful," he said softly. "Not many people can stomach what we do. You make it easier for the families, easier for the community. That's something to be proud of." Then he handed me a small envelope, my week's pay and a little extra. "For your discretion," he added. I stared at the envelope, then at him. That's when I noticed the key ring on his belt. One of the keys had a red tag labeled basement. I'd worked here 7 years and never once seen a basement. That night, when he finally left, I stayed behind. I found the door behind a row of old shelves near the embalming room. The key fit perfectly. The air inside was damp and cold. There were metal shelves lining the walls, each holding sealed boxes. Some had names. Some didn't. But what made me stop was the smell. Faint, sour, like rot that had been covered with bleach. In the corner was a freezer unit. I opened it. Inside were black bags, small ones. Too small. I don't remember leaving. One moment I was staring into that freezer, the next I was outside, vomiting behind the dumpster. I quit the next morning. I told him I couldn't handle the work anymore. He didn't argue. Just nodded and said he understood. 2 weeks later, the funeral home burned down. The fire department said it was faulty wiring. Mr. Garrison was never found. They said maybe he was inside when it happened, but I don't believe that. I've seen his van since, parked near the old county road just past the cemetery. Same dent in the bumper, same faded cross hanging from the mirror. Sometimes when I drive by at night, I see a faint orange glow in the trees, like someone tending a quiet fire, and even now I still smell it sometimes, that mix of smoke and bleach. It clings to my clothes when I wake up. I used to think working in a funeral home made me numb to death, but I was wrong. It just taught me how easily people disappear, when the wrong man decides they should. I've been studying local burial customs for most of my career. It's a strange thing to dedicate your life to, I know, but death tells you more about the living than the living ever will. 3 years ago, my research brought me to a small rural town called Larchfield. It wasn't even on most maps anymore. A handful of houses, one church, and a cemetery older than the town itself. The locals said the cemetery was different. They didn't mean haunted, just strange. I thought it was folklore, until I saw the veil. It was late October when I arrived, that season when the air feels heavy, like the world's holding its breath. I was photographing gravestones, trying to record erosion patterns for my paper. Most of the stones were worn down, names faded, dates lost to time. But in the far corner of the graveyard, where the ground dipped slightly and the grass grew sparse, I saw something out of place. A small grave, almost hidden behind a cluster of dead lilac bushes. The stone itself was simple, pale gray, leaning slightly forward. There was no name, just a single date, 1879. And draped across it was a veil. At first I thought someone had left it recently. It was thin and white, though the color had long since turned gray from the dirt and rain. The fabric was delicate, torn in places, but it hadn't blown away like you'd expect. It clung to the stone as if it belonged there. I took a few photos, made some notes, and moved on. I didn't think much about it until I came back a week later. The veil was still there. That wasn't the strange part. What bothered me was that it looked exactly the same. Same folds, same tears, same patch of mud on the corner. I compared it to my photos. Not a thread had shifted. It should have. The weather had changed. There'd been a storm 2 nights before that tore branches from trees and knocked over half the flower pots in town. But that veil hadn't moved an inch. I asked around in the local diner if anyone knew who was buried in that grave. The waitress, an older woman with sharp eyes and a smoker's voice, just frowned. "Oh, that one," she said. "You don't mess with it." I laughed a little, thinking she was joking, but no one else did. The whole place went quiet. A man at the counter muttered something under his breath, something about the bride in the dirt. They wouldn't say more after that. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way they looked at me, not scared exactly, just tired, like I'd touched a wound that never healed. I went back the next morning. The veil looked different in daylight. Not white anymore, more like the color of old bones. The threads shimmered faintly when the wind brushed through the trees. I knelt down, brushing away some of the loose soil around the stone. There were tiny fragments buried in the dirt, lace, beads, even what looked like a small pearl. Something about it felt wrong. I should have stopped, but curiosity is a kind of sickness in people like me. I pulled on a pair of gloves and lifted the veil slightly. It was damp, heavier than it should have been, and when I turned it over, I saw something stitched into the underside, a pattern made of thread so fine it almost disappeared into the fabric. Letters. I couldn't read most of it, but one word stood out, embroidered over and over again. Wait. My throat went dry. I dropped the veil and backed away. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. I left the cemetery before dusk and promised myself I'd return with better equipment, maybe even bring a colleague to verify what I'd found. But that night, I dreamed of the veil. In my dream, it wasn't lying flat on the grave. It was floating, twisting gently in the air like it was underwater. There was something moving beneath it, a faint shape, just out of focus. I remember hearing a soft voice whispering, though I couldn't tell if it was saying wait or wake. When I woke up, my hands smelled like wet earth. I went back the next day anyway. I told myself it was for research. That's what I always tell myself. But when I reached the grave, my breath caught. The veil was gone. For a moment, I thought maybe someone from town had taken it. Then I noticed the soil. It had been disturbed, freshly turned, like someone had dug and filled it again recently. I stood there for a long time, unsure of what to do. Finally, I started brushing away the top layer of dirt, just enough to see what was underneath. About 3 inches down, my fingers hit fabric. It was the veil. I froze. It hadn't been moved. It had been buried. Carefully, like someone had tucked it in. The same folds, the same stains, the same embroidered words still visible through the soil. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the fabric sinking deeper into the ground. Over the next week, I tried to distract myself with other graves, other research, but my focus kept drifting back to that corner. And every time I looked, the ground around the veil seemed lower, like it was sinking slowly into the earth. By the end of the second week, it was almost completely gone. Only one edge of lace still showed above the dirt. I decided to document it one last time before it disappeared entirely. I set up my camera, took a few shots, and turned to leave. That's when I noticed something behind me, another veil, half buried, just a few feet away. Smaller, newer. I swear it hadn't been there before. The fabric was clean, untouched by time, and folded neatly in the shape of a shroud. My first thought was that someone was playing a cruel joke, but when I looked closer, my chest tightened. The lace pattern was identical, down to the same embroidery. Wait! I stepped back, tripping over a loose root, and nearly dropped my camera. I could feel the air shift around me, colder, heavier. The silence pressed against my ears until it hurt. Then, faintly, I heard it, a soft rustling beneath the dirt. I told myself it was the wind. It wasn't. The sound grew clearer, like fabric dragging against wood. I turned and ran. I don't even remember getting back to my car. I just remember the feeling that something was following me to the gate. Something patient, something old. I left Larchfield the next morning. I never published that paper. I couldn't even look at the photos. But sometimes, when I'm filing my notes, I come across one picture I don't remember taking. It shows the grave from a distance, the veil still draped over it. But if you zoom in, there's a figure standing behind the stone, faint, half buried in shadow. A woman, I think. She's wearing the veil, and every time I look at it, it seems a little closer than before. I couldn't get the image of that veil out of my head. Even after I left Larchfield, it followed me. In dreams, in flashes, in that empty space between thoughts. I told myself it was just curiosity, a side effect of digging too deep into small-town folklore. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same grave, the same faint shimmer of fabric caught in the wind that never blew. 2 weeks after leaving, I got an email from the county records office. I'd requested old cemetery maps before, but they sent me something else by mistake. Or maybe not by mistake. It was a folder labeled Larchfield Police Department, 1978. It should have gone to an archive, not a researcher like me. But I opened it anyway. Inside were brittle yellowing pages, missing person reports mostly. Farmers, travelers, a few drifters who'd passed through town, and one that made me stop breathing. Name, Eleanor May Corbin. Age, 23. Missing since June 4th, 1978. Last seen wearing a wedding dress. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I turned to the attached photo. A woman smiling awkwardly at the camera, veil slightly askew, eyes bright and nervous. She looked real. Too real. Like someone I could have met in a cafe or passed on the street. The report said her fiancé had called the police after she disappeared from the church grounds the morning of their wedding. They found her car near the old bridge, keys still in the ignition. No signs of a struggle, no footprints, no body. The case was closed 6 months later, marked presumed drowned. I sat there, my heart pounding, trying to tell myself it was just coincidence, just a story, but deep down, I already knew Eleanor Corbin. The year matched the erosion pattern on that grave. The veil, the lace, the beads. They could have been hers. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her photo in my mind, wondering what had really happened to her, what had been waiting in that quiet little town all these years. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I was going back to Larchfield. When I arrived, the air felt heavier than before. The cemetery looked the same, but quieter, like the whole place was holding its breath. The veil was gone, of course, buried, hidden. But the ground where it had been looked disturbed again, like someone had dug there recently. I took a slow breath and turned toward the small maintenance shed at the edge of the property. The door was locked, but the window was cracked open. Inside, I found old tools, rakes, and a filing cabinet covered in dust. The cabinet drawers were stiff, rusted, but one opened halfway. Inside were funeral records, handwritten ledgers dating back to the 1940s. I flipped through until I found the section for 1978. There it was, Corbin, E. Interred, June 9, 1978. Grave unmarked, family request. My mouth went dry. I looked again at the entry. Someone had added a note in red ink beside it. Body unrecovered, memorial placement only. So she wasn't even buried there. There shouldn't have been anything under that dirt. No remains. No reason for a veil that never moved. When I stepped outside, the sky had turned gray, the kind of color that makes everything feel older. I looked out across the graves and saw something strange. A man was standing near the far row, facing the trees. His clothes were dark, his posture stiff. I thought maybe he was a groundskeeper, but when I called out, he didn't move. I turned my head for a second, maybe two. And when I looked back, he was gone. I don't know why that frightened me more than anything else. Maybe because I'd seen no place for him to go. The fence behind that row was high, the path clear. He couldn't have vanished that quickly. I left soon after. But back at the motel, I couldn't stop thinking about that note. Family request. If Eleanor's family had placed that grave without a body, maybe they'd known more than they'd said. Maybe someone in town still remembered her. I went through old newspaper archives that night, combing through every mention of her name. Most were small paragraphs. Local bride still missing. Search continues along the river. Family offers reward. Then I found one last article from December of that same year. It was short, printed on the back page. Local pastor retires amid controversy. It mentioned a Reverend Paul Hensley, the same pastor who'd been scheduled to officiate Eleanor's wedding. He'd left town suddenly after the case was closed, citing health concerns. There was a grainy photo beside the article, and standing behind him, barely visible in the church doorway, was a woman in white. I zoomed in until the image pixelated. The veil was unmistakable. I felt sick. By the next morning, I'd convinced myself to visit the church. It stood at the edge of town, roof sagging, windows boarded. Inside, the air smelled like damp wood and dust. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe old records, maybe nothing at all. But on the back wall behind the pulpit, there was a mural. Most of the paint had flaked away, but one section was still visible. A bride kneeling before a grave, holding her veil in both hands. Someone had carved words into the plaster beneath it. I wiped away the dust and my heart nearly stopped. "Wait for me." The same phrase I'd seen stitched into the fabric. That's when I heard the floorboards creak. I turned sharply, but no one was there. Only the faint smell of soil, wet and cold. The air behind me shifted. A slow, dragging sound, like fabric sliding over stone. I whispered her name before I could stop myself. "Eleanor?" The sound stopped. For a few seconds, everything was silent again. Then, from the front of the church, I heard the faintest hum. Soft, melodic, almost like a lullaby. It echoed through the empty room, low and mournful. I backed toward the door, trying not to breathe too loud. The humming grew clearer, and under it I heard another sound, something tapping gently against the floorboards. When I reached the doorway, I saw it, a line of muddy footprints, small and bare, leading down the aisle toward the pulpit. They stopped right where the mural was, and at the end of the trail lay a piece of fabric, torn lace, gray and heavy with dirt. I left the church without looking back. Later that night, I packed my things and drove out of Larchfield for good. But I couldn't bring myself to throw away the file. Her photo, the reports, the strange mural, it all stayed with me. A week after I got home, I received a small brown envelope with no return address. Inside was a black and white photograph. It showed the cemetery, the same corner, the same grave, but this time the veil was back, draped neatly, clean and perfect, as if it had never been touched. And standing just behind the grave was that same dark figure I'd seen before, taller this time. Closer to the stone, there was a note scrawled on the back of the photo in shaky handwriting. "She's waiting for you." I threw the picture away. Burned it, actually, but it didn't matter, because last night when I looked out my window, I saw something in the reflection of the glass, a faint white shape standing in the dark field beyond my yard. Still as a photograph. Her veil barely moved in the wind. And for a moment, I thought I heard her hum, just once, soft, low, and patient. Like someone who'd been waiting a very, very long time. I've driven down Highway 37 more times than I can count. It's a long, empty stretch of road that cuts through farmland and woods, the kind of place that feels disconnected from time itself. Every time I drive it, I swear it looks a little different. Like the land keeps shifting when no one's looking. They say the road is haunted by a bride who never made it to her wedding. Locals call her the woman with cold feet. Not because she got nervous and ran, but because she died out there, buried under the dirt with her wedding dress still on. I used to laugh at stories like that. But now, I remember the first time I heard about her. I was sitting in the diner off the 37 junction, eating breakfast before heading to a job in town. The waitress, a woman named Elsie with tired eyes, asked where I was headed. When I told her, she froze. "Don't drive that road after dark," she said. "Not this week." I asked her why, and she looked at me like I should already know. "It's her anniversary," she whispered. "The day she went missing. That was how it started. Just a story over bad coffee. But I didn't believe in ghosts, so I took the road anyway. It was late when I finished work. The sky was heavy with clouds, no stars, no moon. The fields on either side of the road were just black emptiness, broken only by my headlights. At first, it was just quiet. That kind of quiet that hums in your ears. But after a few miles, I noticed something strange. The air outside the car seemed to shimmer. Like heat waves, except it was cold out. My dashboard thermometer said 43 degrees, but I could see my breath. Then I saw her. At first, I thought it was just fog. But as I got closer, the shape sharpened. A woman standing by the side of the road, barefoot, wearing a white dress. I slowed down. She wasn't facing me. Her head was tilted slightly down, hair covering most of her face. I rolled down my window just a bit and called out, "Hey! You okay?" No answer. I pulled over and got out. My flashlight cut through the dark, landing on her back. Her dress was dirty, brown and gray, like it had been dragged through the ground. Her feet were covered in mud, and something about her posture made me hesitate. "Ma'am?" I said again, keeping my distance. "Do you need help?" That's when she turned. Her face wasn't what I expected. It wasn't bloody or gory. It was worse. It looked dry, like her skin had been left in the sun for too long. Her eyes were open, but there was nothing in them. Just that blank, hollow stare. She took a step forward. Her foot sank slightly into the wet ground. I heard the faintest crunch like breaking frost. And I realized in that horrible quiet that she wasn't breathing. I froze. My brain told me to move, but my body wouldn't listen. Then she whispered, "Don't let him find me." Her voice was faint, trembling. I stepped back, flashlight shaking in my hand. "What do you mean?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She just turned and walked off the road, disappearing into the fields. The next thing I remember, I was back in my car, door slammed shut, driving as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I saw lights again, real lights. The next morning, I went back to that diner. Elsie was there again. I told her what I'd seen. She just nodded slowly, like she'd heard it before. "She always asks that," she said. "Every year. Same night. Same words." I asked her who he was, the one the bride was running from. Elsie hesitated, then leaned closer. Her name was Claire Winton. She was supposed to marry a man named Daniel Rowe in '78. Wedding was canceled at the last minute. Folks said she got cold feet, ran off into the woods before the ceremony. She sighed. But they never found her body. Only her shoes. One on the road, one buried halfway in the dirt. That night haunted me. I tried to tell myself it was just exhaustion, that I'd seen fog and imagined the rest. But the image wouldn't leave my head. The hollow eyes, the way her voice cracked like wind through dry grass. So I started digging. The county archive was small, but it still kept old police reports. I found one from November 1978. Missing person, Claire Winton. According to the file, her fiancé reported her missing the morning of the wedding. Said she'd been acting strange in the days before, nervous, jumpy. A neighbor mentioned hearing screaming in the night. But the police didn't find anything. There was one photo attached, Claire in her dress, smiling. She looked alive, happy even. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I noticed something at the bottom of the report. A handwritten note probably added later, possible foul play. Witness saw Rowe digging near Route 37 field late at night. No warrant issued. The case was closed a few weeks later. No body. No crime. A week after that, I went back to Highway 37. I don't even know why. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself it wasn't real. Maybe I wanted answers. It was dusk. The sky was purple and mist hung low over the fields. I parked where I'd seen her before and waited. Hours passed. Nothing but the sound of wind moving through the grass. I was about to give up when I heard it. Soft footsteps behind me. I turned. No one there. But the dirt near the ditch was disturbed. Like something had clawed its way out, or been buried not long ago. And then, I saw the veil. It was tangled in the weeds, the same one from her wedding photo. I picked it up carefully, and that's when I smelled it. A faint, sweet rot, like old flowers left too long in a vase. I felt something cold brush my hand. "Please," a voice whispered. "Not again." I dropped the veil and stumbled backward. When I looked up, she was standing a few feet away. Same empty eyes, Same dress, only this time she wasn't alone. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, stood a man. His outline was sharp, solid, like he wasn't part of the mist at all. He had something in his hand, a shovel. Claire's lips moved, but I couldn't hear what she said. The man took a step forward, and I swear the ground beneath him rippled, like the earth itself was breathing. Then, in a blink, both of them were gone. The only thing left was that veil, and a half-buried gold ring glinting in the dirt. I brought the ring to the sheriff's office. He looked at me like I was crazy. "This case is 50 years old," he said. "People been telling ghost stories about that woman since before you were born." He took the ring anyway. Promised to check it out. 2 days later, I went back to ask if he'd found anything. The receptionist said he wasn't in. His car was still in the lot, but he hadn't been seen since yesterday. That was 3 weeks ago. Now, every night, I dream about that stretch of road. I see Claire standing there, veil fluttering, lips moving. I wake up before she finishes speaking, heart pounding, hands cold as ice. "Last night, though," she finished. This time, her voice was clear. "He's not dead." I don't know what she meant, but when I looked outside my window this morning, I saw footprints in the mud, bare footprints, leading away from my car, and on the windshield, written in the condensation, were 3 words: "Cold feet run." I haven't driven down Highway 37 since, but sometimes, when the night is quiet and the wind comes from the east, I swear I can still hear her voice, soft, trembling, desperate, begging to be found, begging not to be buried again. And sometimes, I wonder if she ever really was. It started raining just after dusk, the kind of rain that comes down in sheets, so heavy it blurs everything. The trees, the stones, even the air itself. I should have gone home hours before, but something about that cemetery always held me there longer than I meant to stay. I told myself I was working, researching local burial customs, studying the wear on old headstones. But if I'm being honest, it wasn't just research anymore. It was obsession. The veil grave, the one that never changed, had consumed every part of me. I had notebooks full of sketches and timelines, photos of the soil patterns, even transcripts of what the caretakers said they'd seen. I knew I was too deep, but I couldn't stop. That night, the wind cut through the trees in long, hollow gusts. The rain hit my umbrella so hard it sounded like static. My flashlight flickered in the dark, barely reaching past the nearest stones. I told myself I'd take one last look and go home. Just one last look. I walked between the graves, counting them under my breath. The ground was soft, slippery. The smell of wet earth and rotting leaves filled the air. My boots sank with every step, making that sucking sound, like the earth itself was swallowing me. When I reached the old section near the woods, the rain suddenly softened like something above was holding it back. I remember stopping, confused. My light hit the veil grave, the same one I'd visited a dozen times. The decayed fabric was still there, damp but unchanged, as if time didn't touch it. That's when I saw movement. At first, I thought it was the rain playing tricks, a shadow shifting, a tree bending. But then I saw it again, a figure, pale and thin, wandering between the stones. They were soaked through, their clothes clinging to their body. I could see the shape of their spine under the fabric, sharp and rigid. Their head hung low, hair plastered to their face. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. Just the sound of rain hitting marble. I started walking toward them, calling again, louder this time. "Hey, are you all right?" They moved slowly, almost floating from one grave to another. I could hear the squelch of mud under my feet, but not under theirs. When my flashlight finally caught their face, I froze. It was a woman, or what was left of one. Her skin was pale, waterlogged, like she'd been lying in the rain for days. Her lips were blue. Her eyes, half open, seemed to look through me. She wasn't wearing a coat, only a thin white dress that looked decades out of place. And then I saw the veil. It was the same one. The same lace pattern, the same decayed edges. It was her, the woman from the grave. I tried to speak, but my throat locked up. My flashlight trembled in my hand, flickering as the batteries struggled. She turned her head slightly, and for a split second, I thought I saw sadness in her expression, like she recognized me. Then, in a voice that sounded like it came from underwater, she whispered, "Why are you still looking for me?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I didn't understand what she meant. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The rain started again, harder this time, sheets of it drowning out every sound. I blinked through the water, and she was gone. Just gone. The space where she'd stood was empty, except for a small puddle where the ground had sunk, darker than the rest. The mud there shimmered faintly under my light, and for some reason, I knelt down to touch it. It was warm. The rain around me was freezing cold, but that patch of earth felt alive. I don't know how long I knelt there, staring. The world around me was just sound and motion, rain, thunder, wind. Then I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, dragging ones. Coming from behind me, I turned around, but no one was there. The flashlight flickered again, and for a moment I thought I saw movement, a shadow between the stones. I called out again, voice trembling. "Who's there?" Nothing. Then the thunder rolled, loud enough to shake the air, and I saw it. The shape of a man standing under a tree at the edge of the graveyard. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. Lightning flashed, and in that instant, I saw his face. Or rather, I didn't. It was blurred somehow, as if the rain refused to touch it. When the light faded, he was gone too. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. The puddle where the woman had stood began to bubble, faintly, like something underneath was breathing. That was when I ran. I don't remember driving home. I remember the sound of my heartbeat, the way my hands shook so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. I remember seeing my own reflection in the rearview mirror, pale, wide-eyed, soaked, and thinking for a moment it wasn't me. When I finally got inside, I stripped off my wet clothes and threw them in the sink. Mud had seeped through everything, dark and sticky. My skin smelled like the graveyard, like wet soil and decay. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at my desk, staring at my notes. I kept replaying what she said. "Why are you still looking for me?" It didn't make sense.
I wasn't looking for her.
I was studying her grave. That's all. I told myself that over and over, but it didn't help. Sometime around dawn, I noticed something on my notebook. Small, brownish spots along the edges of the paper. At first, I thought it was just dirt. But when I touched it, it was damp. The smell was unmistakable. Earth. Wet, fresh earth. I checked the floor beneath my chair and froze. There were footprints, bare footprints, leading from the door to where I sat. I didn't go back to the cemetery for 3 days. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. A mix of exhaustion, storm, imagination. But the footprints in my house stayed. They never dried. On the 4th day, I got a call from the groundskeeper, Alan. His voice was shaking. "You need to see this," he said. When I arrived, the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like it. The ground was soggy and uneven. Alan led me to the same spot, the Vale grave, except now it wasn't there. The veil was gone. The stone itself had sunk deeper into the soil, tilted at an angle. The dirt around it had been disturbed, like someone had dug there recently. I knelt down and brushed away the wet mud. Something metallic glinted beneath. It was a ring, gold, simple, but old. There were initials engraved inside. CW. Before I could say anything, Alan said, "You shouldn't be here anymore. She's awake." I looked up at him. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" "She doesn't like being remembered," he said. "Not anymore." Then he walked away, leaving me kneeling there, mud on my hands, the ring clenched in my palm. That night, the rain came back. Harder than before. The thunder rattled my windows and the power flickered off twice. At midnight, I heard a sound outside my door. Soft tapping. Like someone knocking gently. I froze. The tapping came again. 3 slow knocks, then silence. I wanted to believe it was just branches, or the wind. But when I looked through the window, there was someone standing at the edge of the yard. A woman, soaked to the bone. Hair stuck to her face, wearing white. Even through the rain, I could see the outline of the veil draped over her head. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. She raised her hand slowly, and I saw the glint of the same ring I'd found, shining faintly through the storm. Then she whispered something. I couldn't hear it through the glass, but I could read her lips. You found it. And then she smiled, not a kind smile. Not even human, just a slow, twisted curl that made my stomach drop. The thunder roared, lightning lit up the yard, and she was gone. But in the morning, when I stepped outside, I found footprints in the mud, leading from the gate to my porch, and on the railing carved into the wood with something sharp were the same initials I'd seen on the ring, CW. I don't go out during storms anymore, not even to look out the window, because every time the rain begins to fall, I can feel it. That same warmth in the air, that same breath beneath the earth. And somewhere out there, I know she's still wandering, still soaked, still waiting to be found, or maybe waiting for me to stop looking. I've been having the same dream for weeks now. It always begins in silence. No wind, no rain, just that deep, heavy quiet you can feel in your chest. I'm standing in the old cemetery, barefoot, wearing clothes that don't belong to me. There's a veil tangled in my hands, wet, cold, and heavier than fabric should ever be. In the dream, I lift it. The lace sticks to my fingers, leaving streaks of dirt across my skin. I try to look through it, but there's nothing on the other side. Just darkness. And then, from somewhere in that dark, I hear a voice whisper my name. Soft, slow, drawn out. Like it's savoring the sound of me. When I wake, I can still feel the weight of that veil in my hands. Every single time. The first time it happened, I thought it was stress. I hadn't slept properly since the night of the storm. I kept replaying everything, and the soaked woman, the footprints, the initials carved into my railing. I told myself it wasn't real, that it couldn't be. But that voice, the one calling my name, felt too close, too real. It's strange how fast you start to lose track of what's real when you stop sleeping. Days blend together, sounds stretch, shadows shift. I started hearing things around the house. Soft knocks, creaking floorboards, the hum of something moving through the walls. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night convinced someone had just whispered right beside me. Every time I turned on the light, there was no one there. Last night, I dreamt again. Only this time the dream didn't start in the cemetery. It started here, in my room. The rain was falling outside, steady and calm. My window was open, and the curtains fluttered slightly in the breeze. When I sat up, I realized I wasn't alone. Someone was standing at the foot of my bed, a woman. Her face hidden beneath a long, dripping veil. The sound of water dripping onto the floor filled the room. Slow, steady, endless. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. My throat locked tight. She leaned closer. I could see the faint outline of her jaw under the lace. Her hand, thin and pale, reached out, trembling slightly. When she spoke, her voice wasn't just sound. It felt like breath against my ear. You found what was mine. I woke up screaming. At first, I thought it was just the dream. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I turned on the light, trying to calm myself, telling my body it was over. But as I pulled the blanket tighter around me, I froze. Something was there. A piece of fabric lying across my bed, wet, mud-stained, heavy, the veil, the same one, the same smell of soil and rot, the same lace pattern I'd traced with my hands in the graveyard. I backed away, pressing myself against the wall. For a long time, I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at it. My mind refused to make sense of what I was seeing. How could it be here? I'd left it buried. I'd seen it vanish with her. And yet there it was, spread neatly across my bed, dripping onto the floor. The air in the room was freezing. My breath came out in small clouds. I felt watched. Not like someone was outside, but like someone was standing right behind me, inches from my skin. I forced myself to pick up the veil. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. It felt wrong. The fabric pulsed faintly, like it had a heartbeat. When I held it up to the light, I saw a faint brown stain along the edge, not dirt this time. Blood. That was when I ran. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked under a flickering streetlight. The rain didn't stop, and every time it hit the windshield, I thought I heard that whisper again. My name, over and over. In the morning, I drove to the cemetery, even though every part of me screamed not to. The sky was gray, the ground still soaked from the storm. The Vale grave looked different. The headstone had sunk deeper. The earth was cracked open slightly, like something beneath had shifted. And where the Vale had once been, that faint outline on the soil, was now empty, gone. I knelt down and ran my fingers over the mud. It was soft, warm, and there it was again. That faint whisper almost lost under the wind. "Please don't leave me!" I fell backward, heart hammering. The voice wasn't angry. It was desperate, and it was closer now. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I locked every door, every window. I turned on all the lights. I sat at my desk, staring at the veil, which I'd wrapped in a garbage bag, sealed tight with tape. I told myself I'd take it to the police in the morning. Let them deal with it. Let someone else explain how a 50-year-old burial shroud ended up in my house. But around midnight, the power went out. Everything went black. At first, I thought it was just the storm again, but then I heard it. Slow footsteps moving down the hallway. I held my breath. The steps stopped just outside my door. Then, knock. 3 slow knocks I didn't answer. I couldn't. After a few seconds, the door handle turned. The wood creaked as it opened, just an inch, then 2. "Why are you hiding?" Her voice slid through the dark like water through cracks. I grabbed my phone for light, but the screen wouldn't turn on. I backed away inch by inch, until I hit the wall. Then I saw it. The veil, the one I'd wrapped and sealed, was lying in the doorway. Open. A trail of wet footprints led from the hall to the center of the room. I could smell her now. Damp earth, flowers that had died long ago. The voice came again, closer this time. "You woke me. You took what's mine." The air thickened. My ears started to ring. I felt something brush against my arm, cold and soft. I screamed and ran for the front door, tripping over the carpet. When I got outside, the night was silent. No rain, no wind. Just silence. I didn't go back in. Not that night. Not for 3 days. When I finally did, the veil was gone. I thought it was over. I really did. But yesterday morning, I woke up to find something waiting on my doorstep. A small box wrapped in brown paper. No return address. No note I knew before I opened it. I could feel it. Inside was the veil, folded neatly. Clean now. No mud, no blood. And underneath it, a ring. The same gold ring I'd found in the graveyard, with the same initials carved inside, CW. There was something else, too. A slip of old paper, torn at the edges, faded ink. It was a piece of a wedding invitation. Claire Winton and Daniel Rowe, November 18th, 1978. The handwriting was elegant, careful, but underneath it, scrawled in newer ink, were 3 words. She never left. I've stopped sleeping completely. Every time I close my eyes, I hear her calling. Not in anger, not even in pain, but in longing, like she needs me. And the worst part is, I think I understand now. The dreams aren't dreams. They're memories, hers bleeding into mine. The veil isn't just fabric, it's a tether, something that pulls the living toward the dead. And now that I've touched it, it won't let go. I can feel her even now. Somewhere close, moving through the quiet. Every time I walk past a mirror, I half expect to see her behind me. Pale, dripping, patient, waiting for me to put the veil back where it belongs. Waiting for me to finish what she couldn't. Sometimes, late at night, when I whisper her name, Claire, the air grows still. The world holds its breath, and for just a moment, I swear I hear her answer. Soft, familiar, unmistakable, my own voice, calling back. I was never supposed to be in the archives that night. The library closed at 8, but I had a paper due the next morning and no motivation to write it. So I stayed. I always stayed. The security guard had gotten used to me being there. A quiet presence at the same desk every evening, surrounded by towers of old books and the hum of fluorescent lights. That night, though, something felt different. The air smelled Older, if that makes sense. Dust, paper, and something faintly metallic, like dried blood or rusted metal. I had been searching through a set of history journals when I noticed the drawer behind the main archive desk was slightly open. It wasn't supposed to be. Everything in that section was kept locked. I hesitated, glancing around. The lights flickered above me, and I told myself it was just the building settling, the wiring being old. But curiosity won. It always does. I pulled the drawer open a little more. Inside were dozens of catalog cards, most yellowed with age. But at the very back, tucked beneath them, was something that didn't belong there, a small black notebook bound in cracked leather. There was no label, no number, no record slip, just that black cover and a faint marking on the spine, like someone had once tried to carve a symbol into it and stopped halfway through. I don't know why, but touching it made me feel uneasy. The leather was cold, not the kind of cold that fades after a second, but one that lingers, like the thing had been sitting in a freezer, waiting. I told myself it was probably nothing. An old journal misplaced, maybe part of a donation. But when I opened it, I realized it wasn't a regular notebook. The first few pages were blank, stained with what looked like water damage. Then, halfway through, the handwriting began. Small, tight letters, written in dark ink. The writing slanted down, like the person's hand had been trembling as they wrote. The first line said, "If you're reading this, the librarian is already watching." I actually laughed when I read that. A nervous laugh, sure, but still, it sounded like the beginning of some bad creepypasta. But the more I read, the quieter I got. The writer talked about hearing footsteps in the library after midnight. Not from the guards, but from someone who wasn't supposed to be there. They said the footsteps would stop right behind the shelves, then start again, always circling, never getting closer, but never leaving either. They mentioned the archives, too. How books kept appearing on their desk even though they hadn't checked them out. Titles about grief, loss, ritual burials, and local legends. There was a paragraph that stood out to me. She comes for the ones who read too much. The librarian hides her face behind dust and paper, but she listens through the walls. If you hear her sigh, close your eyes. Don't look. Don't let her know you saw her. I paused there. The building was silent except for the low hum of the lights. My own breathing felt too loud. I flipped a few pages ahead, more entries, all rambling, all worse than the last. The writer talked about books disappearing overnight and how no one believed them, how they saw the librarian's reflection in the glass when no one was standing there. Then it just stopped, mid-sentence. I sat there for a long time staring at the page. I could feel my pulse in my fingers, in my throat. The air seemed thicker, heavier. I looked around the room, expecting to see someone standing behind me. But there was nothing. Just shelves, books, and the echo of my own heartbeat. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The smell of dust had grown stronger, almost sweet now, like rotting flowers. I closed the notebook and decided to put it back. Only, I couldn't. The drawer I had opened was empty. Completely empty. I swore it had been filled with cards just a few minutes ago. My hands shook a little as I searched the desk, the floor, even the shelves nearby. Nothing. The lights flickered again once, twice, and then I heard it. A soft shk, shk, like the sound of shoes dragging slowly across the linoleum floor. I froze. It was coming from the next aisle over, near the reference section. The sound stopped, then started again, closer this time. My brain told me it was the guard. It had to be. But when I called out, just a quiet, shaky, "Hello?" no one answered. Silence. I waited another few seconds, then slowly stood up. My chair made a low creak, and the sound echoed through the empty space. I peeked around the corner. Nothing. Just a row of tall shelves stretching into the dark. I started walking toward the exit, notebook still clutched in my hand. My footsteps were soft, almost too soft, as if the floor was muffling them. That's when I noticed something strange. The air wasn't just thick, it was moving. The faintest breeze coming from deep in the archives. I knew for a fact there were no windows down there, no open vents big enough to cause that. The notebook felt heavier in my hand. My instincts screamed to leave, But something in me, maybe the same curiosity that got me into this, wanted to see where it came from. I followed the air back toward the far end of the archive. There, behind a row of broken cabinets, I saw a door I'd never noticed before. It wasn't part of the regular layout, I knew that much. The handle was rusted and there was no label or sign. When I touched it, the metal burned my fingers. I almost turned around right then. But before I could, I heard something faint on the other side. A whisper. It sounded like paper rustling or maybe breathing. I leaned closer and the air grew colder. The smell of dust and something faintly sweet was stronger now. Too strong. Then, right against the wood, I heard it again. A woman's voice. Very soft. She whispered my name. I dropped the notebook. When it hit the floor, it opened to a page I hadn't seen before. The ink was fresh, still wet, and there, written in that same trembling handwriting, were 5 words that made my stomach turn to ice. Don't open the door tonight. I didn't think. I just ran. The lights flickered violently as I moved, and the air seemed to pulse around me. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing under the yellow glow of the streetlights. The night air felt too still, like the world was holding its breath. When the guard found me, I told him I had just lost track of time. He didn't believe me, but he didn't press either. I went home that night with the notebook still in my bag. I didn't open it again. Not for days. But when I finally did, the message had changed. The same page now read, "You already opened it." That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've started hearing the same soft footsteps in my apartment at night. They always stop outside my door. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can smell the same dust. The same sweet rot. And last night, I swear I heard a woman sigh, right next to my bed. When I turned on the light, the notebook was lying open on my nightstand. A new line had appeared at the bottom of the page. It said, "The librarian never forgets her readers." I didn't open the notebook again for a while after that night. It sat on my desk, wrapped in a piece of old cloth like it was something that could burn if I touched it too long. Every time I passed by, I could feel it, like it was watching me, waiting for me to turn a page I wasn't supposed to. But curiosity isn't something you can bury forever. It always finds a way to claw itself back up. It was late again, just past midnight. Rain tapped against my window like it was trying to get in. I couldn't sleep. I hadn't slept properly in days. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the same thing. Slow footsteps in the hall outside my apartment, stopping right outside my door. Always stopping, never leaving. That night, I finally gave in. I unwrapped the notebook. The leather felt warmer now, almost soft. When I opened it, I saw that some of the ink had bled from the moisture in the air. But the words were still there, every letter sharp, like they'd been pressed into the paper by something that didn't need a hand to write. I flipped to the last page I'd read, the one that said, "The librarian never forgets her readers." Underneath, new words had appeared. "The count begins at midnight." I didn't understand what that meant at first. But then I noticed the handwriting continued, different this time. Slower, less shaky, like the person had accepted whatever was happening. The entry started listing names, one after another. Each one had a date next to it. But the dates didn't make sense. They weren't death dates. They were ordinary, random. Sometimes years apart, sometimes just days, and some didn't even have years. Just the day and month. I started reading them aloud, quietly under my breath, just to hear how the names sounded. Eleanor Hayes, April 12th, David Lorne, August 3rd, Marcy Tillman. November 9? My voice felt smaller as I kept going. There were dozens of them, pages filled edge to edge with those names. When I reached the middle of the list, I noticed something else. A few of the names had small marks beside them, tiny ink dots, almost invisible. Every name with a dot was written a little darker than the rest. At first, I thought maybe the ink had just bled. But when I touched one of the dots, I realized it wasn't ink at all. It was sticky, like something wet had dried there long ago. I wiped my hand on my sleeve and flipped the page quickly. trying to ignore the strange chill that had crawled up my arm. That's when I saw the note scrawled across the bottom margin in the same trembling handwriting as before. These are the ones she counted. The ones she couldn't bury. My stomach tightened. I read the line again and again until the words didn't make sense anymore. Then I noticed something worse. The very last name on the page wasn't written in ink. It looked like it had been carved, pressed so hard into the paper that it tore slightly. The name was Thomas Keene, my last name. I froze. My hands went cold, my breath shallow. There was no way that could be a coincidence. I wasn't exactly a common name in this part of the state. I turned to the front of the book, searching for some sign of who wrote it, but there was nothing. Just blank pages and that same faint smell of dust and iron. Then I heard it again, the sound of something moving in the hallway. I looked toward my apartment door. The rain outside made the air thick and heavy, muffling everything, but I could still hear it. Slow, dragging steps. It wasn't just footsteps this time. There was a pause, a breath, a sound that didn't belong to anyone alive. The notebook was still open in front of me. The ink on the page had started to spread again, like it was bleeding. I tried to close it, but the paper felt damp, soft, almost pulsing. And right before I shut it, I saw a new line forming beneath my name. It wrote itself, letter by letter. Not yet. That was enough. I slammed the book shut and threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud and slid onto the floor. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my chair with the light on, listening. By morning, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Sleep deprivation, stress, too much caffeine, whatever explanation made me feel human again. But when I got to campus later that day, I decided to check something. In the library archives, there's an old computer used for local records. It's painfully slow. But it has access to the town's historical registries, births, deaths, marriages, that kind of thing. I typed the first few names from the notebook into the search bar. Eleanor Hayes, nothing. David Lorne, nothing. Marcy Tillman, nothing. No obituaries. No public records. No digital footprint at all. I tried more. Dozens. Every name. Not a single one had ever been recorded as dead. But some had addresses. I recognized a few. They were local. A few were listed in old directories from the 1970s and 80s. People who'd lived here, worked here, and then disappeared. That's when it hit me. The journal wasn't listing dead people. It was listing people who should be dead but weren't recorded as such. People who were missing, forgotten. And I couldn't stop thinking about that line. These are the ones she couldn't bury. I didn't go back to my apartment right away. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in the student cafe, staring at the rain outside. My reflection in the window looked pale and tired, like I hadn't slept in weeks. When I finally got back home that evening, the notebook was waiting for me. I swear I hadn't touched it since throwing it across the room. But now it was sitting on my desk again, perfectly centered, open to a new page. A single line was written in the middle. The count must continue. Underneath, there was an empty list I didn't understand. Then I noticed the pen beside it. The same pen I'd been using to take notes for class earlier that day. It was open, waiting. The page stared up at me like an open wound. I told myself I wouldn't do it. I wasn't that stupid. But I picked up the pen anyway, my hand shaking, and then, without really meaning to, I wrote a name. Clara Jennings. I didn't know where it came from. The name just appeared in my head, like a whisper from somewhere behind my ear. When I finished writing, I heard a faint scratching sound from the hallway. Then, silence. I dropped the pen. I didn't check the hallway. I couldn't. I just sat there staring at the name until the ink began to dry. The next morning, I searched it. Clara Jennings. She was real. She'd been a student here in the late 90s. Disappeared after leaving the library one night. Never found. I didn't sleep again. Not for days. I started seeing things in my peripheral vision. Shadows that didn't belong. Reflections that didn't match. The air around me felt heavier every night, and the notebook, it began opening on its own. Every morning, it would be at a different page. New names added, handwriting that wasn't mine, ink that looked darker, older. I don't know how to explain what happened next. But 2 nights ago, while sitting in bed, I heard my own voice whisper something in the dark. It said, "The count is incomplete." When I turned on the light, the notebook was on my chest, open to the same page. Under Clara Jennings, there was a second name now, Thomas Keene, and beside it, this time, there was a small dark dot. Sticky. Fresh. I don't know what it means. I don't know how it's possible, but I haven't left my apartment since. I keep the notebook closed now, locked in a drawer. Still, sometimes I hear that soft scratching from the other side of the door, and every time it happens, I swear I can hear someone whispering the same thing, just under their breath. The count must continue. I don't know how long I've been awake. Days blur together now. Night and morning feel the same, both heavy, both full of that same quiet pressure that sits in my chest and refuses to leave. I haven't stepped outside since the last time the notebook wrote my name. I told myself if I didn't touch it, if I didn't even look at it again, maybe it would stop. Maybe it would forget me. But last night, something changed. When I woke up, the drawer I had locked it in was open. The notebook was sitting on my desk again, face up, like it had crawled out on its own. It was open to a blank page. Only it wasn't blank. At the top, in that same dark, trembling handwriting, there was a new date. Tomorrow's. And beneath it, my name, Thomas Keene. For a long time, I just stared at it. My heart felt slow, like my body didn't want to move anymore. The words didn't make sense. Not yet, but deep down, I already knew what they meant. It was the same format as all the other entries. The ones I had thought were names of missing people. The ones the librarian, the thing behind all of this, had been counting. The notebook had written my death before it happened. I tried to convince myself it was some kind of cruel prank, that maybe I had written it myself without remembering. I'd been having gaps lately, small blackouts. A few minutes missing here and there. I'd find lights turned off that I was sure I'd left on, or the sound of footsteps fading from my hallway when I hadn't moved in hours. But this felt different. The ink wasn't dry. It looked fresh, still glistening in the light, and there was something else, something that made my stomach twist. At the bottom of the page, written smaller, were 4 words. The librarian is near. That's when the smell came back. That same smell of dust and rotting flowers. The same one from the library. It filled the apartment slowly, almost gently at first. It clung to the walls, the curtains, the back of my throat. I grabbed the notebook and shoved it back into the drawer, slamming it shut until my hands hurt. Then I sat on the floor with my back against the door, just listening. The rain outside had stopped. The building was quiet, too quiet. And then, softly, I heard something move in the hallway. It was the sound of someone dragging fabric across the floor. Like a dress. I told myself not to look. I told myself she couldn't come in if I didn't let her. But curiosity, or maybe terror, got the better of me. I stood up slowly and looked through the peephole. At first, I thought the hall was empty. Then I noticed her, standing at the far end, just at the edge of the light. A tall woman, head bowed, her face hidden beneath what looked like a curtain of old fabric. It moved slightly as if breathing, even though the rest of her body was perfectly still. The same chill from the library crept back into my skin. I stepped away from the door, my heartbeat loud in my ears. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know if she was real anymore. That's when I heard the faint rustle of paper. It was coming from the drawer. I could hear it opening. I didn't go near it. I just watched, frozen, as the wooden drawer slid open on its own. The notebook rose slightly, its pages fluttering as if caught in an invisible breeze. It landed on the desk, open again to that same page, tomorrow's date. The ink had changed. My name was darker now, and beneath it, new words appeared, one by one, as if written by an unseen hand. She is almost done counting. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to throw it out the window, but my body wouldn't move. Every muscle in me felt locked, like my own fear was keeping me in place. Then, I heard something that didn't belong. A whisper. So faint that I thought it was my mind breaking apart from exhaustion. It said, "You read too far." The air in the room shifted, heavier now. My lamp flickered once, then went out completely. The only light came from the window, soft, gray, and wet. I sat down on the edge of my bed, staring at the open notebook. The words on the page had started to blur, melting into each other like wet ink. That's when I noticed something else written faintly at the very bottom. I had to lean in close to read it. Look beneath the first page. I didn't want to. Every instinct told me not to. But my hands moved anyway, almost like they weren't mine. I turned to the beginning of the notebook, the place where all of this had started. Beneath the first page, there was something glued between the paper and the cover. It looked like another sheet, thinner, more fragile. I peeled it back carefully, and a folded piece of old newsprint fell out. It was a clipping, a newspaper article from decades ago. The headline read, "Local student found dead in library basement. Journal recovered at scene." There was no picture, but the article described it in brief, cold sentences. A student had been found collapsed among the archives, cause of death unknown. Witnesses claimed she'd been researching town records before the incident. At the bottom, one line stood out. Authorities have not located the notebook mentioned in the report. My blood went cold. I looked again at the date on the article. It was tomorrow's date. Same day, same month, same year. Only the article was from 50 years ago. I don't remember dropping the paper, but I must have, because when I blinked again, it was lying on the floor. The letters seemed to crawl across the page like they were still being written. That's when I realized. The notebook wasn't predicting anything. It was repeating. Every time someone read it, the story started over. Another name added, another count, and this time it was mine. I tried to burn it. God, I tried. I grabbed my lighter, held the flame to the corner of the page, but the fire wouldn't catch. The paper didn't even darken, it just hissed. And then faintly, I heard her again. That slow dragging sound in the hall. Closer this time. I turned toward the door, heart hammering in my throat. A shadow passed under the crack at the bottom of the door, thin, unmoving. The knob twitched once, twice, and then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any noise I could imagine. After what felt like hours, I forced myself to look back at the notebook. It had flipped to the very last page. This time, there was no date. Just a single sentence written across the middle in that same dark, shaking script. When the count ends, she will open the door. And beneath it, almost too faint to read, she only needs one more. I don't know what that means. I don't want to. But tonight, midnight, will be the time written next to my name. The final count. The rain started again a few minutes ago. The air smells like the archives now, old paper and something sweet. I can hear the same sound outside my door. That dragging of fabric, slow and deliberate. Sometimes it stops, like she's listening. Sometimes I hear a whisper through the wood. My name, over and over. I don't think I'll make it to morning. But if someone finds this notebook after me, don't open it. Don't read past the first page, because if you do, she'll start counting again. And the next name will be yours. I still remember the sound the river made that morning. It wasn't the soft, flowing kind of sound that usually fills your head when you think about water. It was slower, heavier, like the current was holding its breath. The fog had rolled in thick, pale, and quiet. I'd gone out early, earlier than usual. My wife said I shouldn't, that the storm last night might have stirred up the mud too much. But the river was my routine. When you've been fishing the same waters for 30 years, you learn to trust the silence more than people's words. I set my line and waited. The air was cold enough to sting my fingers. Every sound, the pull of the rope, the creak of the dock, felt too sharp in that silence. I thought maybe the river was warning me to go home. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just moss, a clump of green caught between the reeds, swirling in the slow current. But when the fog shifted, I saw something small tangled in it, something pale. I pulled the net closer, squinting. It wasn't a fish, it was a shoe. A child's shoe, old, worn at the edges, but small, too small for any grown person. It was caught in the river moss, like the river itself didn't want to let go. For some reason, that sight, it froze me. I've seen dead fish, drowned dogs, even the body of a drunk who fell from the bridge years ago. But that shoe, it felt different, personal, sad in a way I couldn't explain. I reached for it, my hands shaking. When I lifted it out of the water, a small piece of blue fabric came with it, part of a sock maybe, clinging to the sole. And then I smelled it. The kind of smell that sticks to your skin even after you wash. Something rotten, old, like wet earth and decay. It was faint, but it carried something wrong, like the river was keeping secrets. I dropped the shoe on the deck and backed away. The fog seemed thicker now. The trees across the river had blurred into gray shapes, like the world itself was shrinking. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from behind that fog. I picked up the shoe again, turning it over. The inside was torn, the stitching frayed, and there was something written in black marker on the sole. A name. Eli. I stared at it for a long time. The letters were faded but clear enough to read. My first thought was that it must have belonged to one of the village kids. Maybe one of them lost it last summer. Maybe it drifted downstream. That's what I told myself anyway. But then I remembered something. About 10 years ago, a boy went missing in these same waters. His name was Eli Turner. He'd been playing near the bank one afternoon and never came home. Search teams looked for days, but they never found him. The river kept him. After that, nobody let their kids near the water again. People said the river was cursed, that it took what it wanted. I never believed that. Not until now. I wanted to throw the shoe back in, let it drift away like it never existed. But some strange part of me couldn't. It felt wrong to leave it there. So I put it in my tackle box and packed up early. On the way home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The weight of it. The way it looked like something that had been waiting to be found. When I got back to my cabin, I set the box on the kitchen table and made coffee. The clock said 7:12, but it felt like the day had already ended. The fog outside hadn't lifted. It just sat there, pressed against the windows like it wanted to come in. I opened the tackle box again. The shoe was still wet, but the water had changed color. The bottom of the box was covered in this thin layer of dark silt. River mud, maybe. I reached for a towel to clean it up, but when I lifted the shoe again, something small fell out. A coin. A silver coin. Dull and old. With a faint engraving I couldn't make out. I don't know why, but it scared me. It was just a coin, but it felt placed there. Like an offering. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard water moving. Soft, deliberate, like footsteps wading through the river. At one point, I thought I heard a voice too, muffled, calling from outside. It sounded like a child. I tried to ignore it. Told myself it was the wind, or my memory playing tricks on me. But when I looked out the window, I saw something by the shore. A shape. Small, hunched, pale against the black water. I blinked and it was gone. The next morning, the fog was still there. Thicker than ever. My wife didn't come by. She usually brings breakfast when she knows I'm fishing. But I didn't mind. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I went back to the table. The shoe was gone. At first I thought I'd moved it and forgotten. But when I opened the back door, there it was, sitting right on the wooden step, soaked again. There was something new inside, a handful of river moss. And beneath that, a scrap of paper. I unfolded it carefully, trying not to tear it. It was covered in tiny, childlike handwriting. Only 4 words. He's still in there. My stomach dropped. I don't know what made me do it, but I took the note and the shoe and walked straight to the river. The air smelled heavier, like the world was holding its breath again. When I reached the dock, the water was perfectly still. No wind, no ripples. Just that endless gray reflection staring back at me. I called out, half to the fog, half to myself. Eli, no answer. Just silence. Then from somewhere beneath the dock, I heard a splash. Not big, not violent, just one sound. I crouched down and looked over the edge. The water was dark, but I could make out something moving below the surface. Not a fish. Too still for that. It looked human. I leaned closer, and then I saw it. An eye. Pale, colorless, staring straight up at me through the water. I stumbled back so fast I almost fell. My heart was pounding, my throat dry. The water rippled once, then went still again. I ran home and locked the door. I don't know how long I sat there, shaking, staring at that door like something might follow me in. That evening, I heard the knock. 3 soft taps. I didn't move. I didn't answer. Then another 3 taps. Louder this time. I went to the window instead, trying to see if anyone was there. But the fog had swallowed everything again. When I looked down, I noticed something on the ground near the door. The shoe. It was dry this time, and on the toe, written in mud, was one word. Home. I think I screamed. I can't remember. The next thing I knew, it was morning again. My head hurt. The fog was gone. Everything was bright and normal, like the world had reset itself overnight. But when I checked the river from my porch, the water was lower than usual. I could see the moss-covered rocks and bits of driftwood that hadn't been visible before. And in the shallow part, right near the dock, I saw it. A small skeleton hand, half buried in mud. I called the police, of course. They came, took statements, searched the area. They said it was animal remains at first, but when the lab reports came back, they changed their tone. They told me it belonged to a boy, probably around 9 or 10 years old. They asked if I'd ever found anything else down there. I said no, but that was a lie. I couldn't tell them about the shoe, or the note, or the thing that looked up at me through the water. Because that night, when I went to bed, the river spoke again. I heard the soft splash of small feet wading through the shallows. And right before I drifted off, I heard that same childlike whisper, just 2 words this time. Thank you. In the morning, the shoe was gone for good, and for the first time in weeks. The river sounded calm again, but I haven't gone fishing since, because some nights, when the fog rolls in thick, I swear I still hear the water move, like someone small is walking beneath the surface, still counting the steps back home. I didn't plan to go back to the cemetery, not after what happened with the river. But when the sheriff came knocking that morning, holding his hat like a man carrying bad news, I knew before he said a word, this was about that place again. He said they'd found something strange near the east side of the graveyard, something the rain had uncovered after last night's storm. He knew I spent time around the river, that I'd found things before I didn't want to go. But curiosity has a way of feeling like gravity. It pulls you even when you know you'll fall. The cemetery sat right behind the church, built on a slope that faced the water. The fence was half collapsed, the gate eaten through by rust. Every grave there looked forgotten, names half erased, stones sinking into the ground like they were trying to hide from time. When I arrived, 2 deputies were standing by a row of open pits. The dirt was soft, wet, almost black. I could smell the river on the wind even though it was a mile away. Muddy, metallic, thick. Take a look, one of them said quietly. I stepped closer. The graves were old. The wood of the coffins had warped and cracked under the rain. I expected bones, the pale shape of time's leftovers. But what I saw instead made my stomach turn. Each coffin was filled to the brim with water. Dark, murky water that smelled exactly like the river. The same heavy silt, the same rotting weeds floating on the surface, but no bodies. Not one, just water. I asked them whose graves these were, but the sheriff just shook his head. We checked the records, he said. Some of these go back to the late 1800s, but this... He paused, looking down into the pit. This don't make any damn sense. He was right. It didn't. The ground wasn't flooded anywhere else, just those specific graves. 7 of them, side by side, perfectly aligned. Each one full as if someone, or something, had poured the river into them on purpose. I leaned closer, peering into one of the coffins. The water shimmered faintly, even under the gray sky. I thought I saw movement beneath the surface, like something shifting. I blinked and it was gone. Still, I felt it. That same quiet weight in my chest. The same feeling I'd had when I pulled that shoe from the river weeks ago. The sheriff told me they'd send samples to the lab, maybe find a cause, but even he sounded like he didn't believe his own words. When I left, I walked along the back edge of the graveyard, where the ground dipped slightly toward the trees. The air was colder there, heavy with the smell of wet earth. That's when I saw it. A small wooden marker, half buried in mud. The name carved into it was barely visible, but I could still make out the letters, Eli Turner. My heart stopped. That was the boy's name, the one from the river, the one whose shoe I'd found. I stared at it for a long time, my breath fogging the air. The wood was cracked, the edges darkened with age, but the dirt around it looked freshly disturbed, like someone had been digging. I knelt down and touched the ground. It was damp, soft. My fingers sank easily into it, and when I pulled them back, the mud was streaked with something thin and silvery. Water. I don't know why, but that terrified me more than anything else. That night I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The rain kept tapping against the windows like fingers. Every drop sounded heavier than it should have been. I kept seeing those empty coffins in my head, the way the water looked still, but alive. At some point I decided to go back. I told myself I just needed to see it once more, to understand it. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. I wasn't looking for answers. I was being called back. The cemetery looked different at night. The fog rolled low, crawling over the grass like smoke. The moon was just a thin curve, pale and cold. I brought a lantern, but the light barely cut through the mist. When I reached the graves, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The water inside the coffins wasn't calm anymore. It was trembling, rippling softly as if something beneath was breathing. I stood there, staring, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. But then I realized something that made my throat tighten. There was no wind. Not a single leaf moved. I knelt beside one of the graves, holding the lantern over it. The surface of the water glimmered faintly, showing my reflection. But then the light flickered and the reflection changed. It wasn't me anymore. It was a boy. Pale face, dark hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wide open. He was staring right at me. I dropped the lantern. It hit the ground and went out, plunging everything into darkness. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. The silence pressed around me like water closing over my head. I could hear my own breathing, sharp and uneven. Then I heard another sound, a drip, slow, steady, coming from behind me. I turned around, and there, a few feet away, was a new grave, one that hadn't been there before. The soil was freshly turned, and the marker at its head had no name, just a blank piece of wood. The air smelled of river moss. Something inside me broke then. I ran. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I reached my cabin. My boots left muddy prints all the way to the door. I locked every window, every latch, but the smell followed me inside. Wet earth, stagnant water. I tried to calm down, but then I heard it, a faint dripping sound. It was coming from the hallway. I turned on the light. The floorboards were wet, glistening as if something had been dragged across them. There was a thin trail of water leading to my bedroom door. I followed it, shaking. Every step felt like it took hours. When I pushed the door open, I froze. There, on my bed, sat the same wooden marker I'd seen in the graveyard, the blank one, and underneath it was a small puddle. The water wasn't clear. It was dark, muddy, and when I looked closer, I realized it was moving, rippling softly, as if stirred from beneath. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on it. Then I saw something rise to the surface, a shoe, small, worn, soaked through. I knew that shoe. Before I could move, I heard a voice, faint, from inside the water. It was a whisper, drawn out like the breath of someone who hadn't spoken in years. You found me. I felt the air leave my lungs. The water shimmered again, and for a brief second, I saw that same pale face from the grave, the boy looking up at me from inside the puddle. Then it went still. The next morning, the puddle was gone. The bed was dry. The wooden marker had vanished. I tried to tell myself it was a dream, but when I walked outside, I saw muddy footprints on the porch, small ones, leading away from the cabin toward the river. The sheriff called later that day. He said they'd drained the graves, trying to find a cause for the flooding. He paused before finishing his sentence. They were empty, he said. Completely dry now, like they were never filled at all. I didn't answer. That night I went down to the river again. The moonlight shimmered on the surface, calm and perfect. But the air felt wrong. I could hear faint splashing sounds far out near the bend, like children playing in the shallows, laughing softly. When I got closer, the sound stopped. The water went still again. Something brushed against my boot. I looked down. A hand, small, pale, reaching out of the water, fingers grasping at the air as if searching for something. I froze. My throat locked. I couldn't move. Then the hand slipped back under, leaving only ripples. And as they faded, I saw the reflection of 7 small faces below the surface, eyes open, mouths still, waiting for me. I left the river that night and never returned, but sometimes, when it rains hard enough, the ground outside my cabin softens. The puddles turn dark, and if I listen closely, through the thunder I can still hear it, soft splashing. Just beyond the window, like something buried deep is trying to come home again. I used to think the dead were silent, that once the dirt covered them, the world became still again. But I was wrong. It started a few days after the sheriff closed the investigation. He told me the cemetery was safe. The graves are dry now, he said. No reason to worry. But even as he said it, I could tell he didn't believe himself. The ground around my cabin hadn't stopped sinking since the storm. The soil was soft, like it had lost its strength. Every time it rained, puddles formed near the porch, and every time I heard faint noises in them. Little pops. Small shifts, like air bubbles rising from something buried too deep. I tried to ignore it. Until the night the laughter began, it was past midnight. The rain had been steady for hours, tapping on the roof in uneven rhythms. I was half asleep when I heard it. A sound so light, so distant, I almost thought it was the wind. It was a laugh. A child's laugh. Soft. High-pitched. It came from outside. I sat up, heart thumping. The room was dark except for the dim orange glow from the lantern on the table. For a long moment, I just listened. The laugh came again, clearer this time. It wasn't playful. It was strange, hollow, echoing through the walls like it was being carried by water. Then I heard a second one. And a third, children. More than one. They sounded close. Too close. I got up and went to the window. The rain blurred everything outside, but I could still see the muddy stretch leading toward the woods. The puddles shimmered in the lantern light, and that's when I saw movement. Tiny ripples spreading across the largest puddle near the tree line. The water trembled, then stilled. I opened the door and the cold air hit me like a slap. The smell of wet dirt filled my lungs. I stepped outside slowly, careful not to make a sound. The laughter came again. This time it was coming from beneath me. At first I thought it was echoing off the porch. But then I felt it, a faint vibration under my feet, like someone was tapping the wood from underneath. I froze. The hair on my neck rose. The sound shifted. The laughter turned into whispers. Dozens of them. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone, it was like they were arguing. Children's voices, fast and low, talking over each other from somewhere below. I backed away, my breath clouding in the cold air. The ground near the steps began to move, just a little. The soil swelled upward, then sank again like something was pressing from beneath. I ran inside and locked the door. For hours I sat there in the dark, listening. The whispers went on until the rain stopped, and then everything went quiet again. When morning came, I tried to convince myself it had been a dream. I even laughed a little, told myself I was hearing the river, or maybe the wind whistling through the cracks. But when I went outside, I saw something that made my knees weak. All around the cabin, the mud was covered in tiny handprints. Small, perfect handprints, dozens of them pressed deep into the soil. I remember standing there for what felt like hours, staring at them. I didn't move until the clouds started to gather again. That evening, I decided to go back to the cemetery. I had to know if the graves were still empty. Maybe I thought it would calm me. Maybe I just wanted proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The gate creaked open as I stepped inside. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of rain-soaked flowers and iron. Everything looked normal at first. The rows of stones, the wilted grass, the silence. But as I walked deeper, I noticed something strange. Some of the gravestones had shifted. They weren't upright anymore. They leaned slightly, as if the ground beneath them had moved. When I reached the far end, near the line of the 7 old graves, I stopped. The dirt there looked different. It wasn't sunken or cracked. It was smooth, too smooth, like freshly packed sand. I knelt down, touched it, and felt the same damp chill as the riverbank. And then I heard it again, a laugh. It came from under the soil. I stumbled back, heart racing. My eyes darted across the graves, and I realized every one of them had the same faint sound beneath it. Little voices, muffled and distant, overlapping like a broken lullaby. They weren't crying. They weren't moaning. They were laughing, I shouted. I told them to stop. My voice cracked, echoing off the trees. But the laughter only grew louder, higher, more frantic, like they were mocking me. And then, all at once, it stopped. The silence was so sudden it rang in my ears. I stood there, shaking, staring at the ground, and that's when I noticed something new. The dirt was moving again. This time I could see it clearly, tiny bubbles rising through the wet soil, bursting one after another. I don't know what made me do it, but I dropped to my knees and dug. My fingers tore into the mud until I hit wood, a coffin lid. I brushed the muck away, hands trembling. There was a sound, soft and wet, from inside. Like someone breathing. I leaned closer. Then I heard a whisper. So quiet I almost didn't catch it. "You found us." I fell backward, gasping. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. The voice had been right next to my ear, like it came through the wood itself. I ran. I don't remember how long or how far. I didn't stop until I reached the river. The water was high again, rushing and cold. I dropped to my knees, staring at it. The current looked different, thicker, darker. For a moment, I saw faces in it. Children's faces, smiling. When I got home, the ground around my cabin was dry again. The handprints were gone. Everything looked untouched. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard something new. Not laughter, not whispers. It was humming, a soft tune, like a lullaby coming from underneath the floorboards. I pressed my ear to the wood and listened. It was a song I didn't recognize, slow, looping, almost gentle. But underneath it, faint and broken, I could hear words. "Down we go. Under stone, all who hear. We'll come home." The singing went on until morning. When I got up, my ears were still ringing with it. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that it was stress or exhaustion or maybe guilt for going back there at all. But the next day, I found something by the door, a small stone, perfectly smooth, and carved into its surface were 3 letters, E.T.B. Eli Turner's initials. I dropped it. The moment it hit the ground, I heard laughter again, just a burst like it came from deep inside the earth. The sound faded as quickly as it came, but the floorboards under my feet still felt warm. Like something living was breathing beneath them. I stopped sleeping after that. I couldn't. Every night, the same thing happens. The laughter starts faint just under the house. Then it spreads, through the walls, the windows, the ground outside. Sometimes I hear footsteps running around the cabin. Sometimes I feel them. Small thuds, quick and light, and every morning I find something new. A wet footprint on the porch, a stone placed beside the bed. Once, even a small wooden cross, dripping with river water. I've thought about leaving, but the truth is, I think it's too late. I don't think they want me to go. Yesterday, I dug up the floorboards near the center of the cabin, where the sound is loudest. Beneath them, the dirt is hollow. When I knock on it, it sounds empty. I dropped a small rock into the hole and listened. It didn't hit bottom, just silence, until I heard a voice from below, soft and sweet. "Come play with us." Now, every time it rains, I hear their laughter again. It rises through the ground, through the wood, through me, and sometimes, when I wake up at night, I find dirt under my fingernails. Like I've been digging, like I've already started answering their call. I used to think the dead were silent. Now I know better. Some graves don't stay quiet. They whisper. They laugh. And if you listen long enough, you start laughing back. The rain began before dawn. Not soft or steady, no, this was the kind that never ends. The kind that eats away at everything it touches. I woke to the sound of it pounding against the roof, a constant roar that filled every corner of the cabin. The river had been rising for days, creeping closer each night. By morning, it had already swallowed the lower path to town. I remember standing by the window, watching the rain smear across the glass like tears. The trees bent under the wind. The air felt heavy, swollen with water. Even breathing seemed harder that day. The ground outside was already half drowned. Puddles had joined into small lakes, and the earth pulsed under them like it was alive. I could hear it, those low, muffled thuds beneath the soil. It wasn't thunder. It was movement. I told myself not to go out there. Not again. But something in me needed to see it. Needed to know if the voices were still waiting under the graves. By noon, the storm had turned violent. The sky was a bruised gray, and the rain came sideways, like a wall. I put on my coat and stepped outside anyway. The wind pushed against me with every step. The smell of wet earth and decay was everywhere. The cemetery was half a mile up the hill, but that hill wasn't a hill anymore. It was a slow river of mud and stones, sliding downward in silence. When I finally reached the gate, it was already gone, buried under water. The sign that once said Riverside Rest floated nearby, spinning slowly in the current, and the graves. God, they were gone too. Or rather, they weren't graves anymore. They were pools, dark circles of water where earth should have been. Headstones leaned like broken teeth, their names blurred by the rain. And then, something moved, a ripple in one of the pools. Then another. At first, I thought it was the rain striking the surface, but the ripples were wrong. They came from beneath. The water swelled, and a pale shape broke through. My stomach dropped when I saw what it was. A hand, small, gray. Fingers spread wide, trembling as if reaching for air. Then another one appeared. And another, dozens of them. Tiny hands pressing up through the waterlogged soil, clawing at the surface. It didn't look like panic. It looked like invitation. They weren't fighting to escape. They were calling. I took a step back, nearly slipping in the mud. My breath came out in short bursts. The hands didn't stop. They kept rising, pushing through the water like flowers reaching for sunlight. And all around me, the whispering began again. That same soft, childlike tone I'd heard beneath the cabin. Except this time it was clearer, closer. I couldn't make out the words, but it wasn't just sound. It was rhythm. Like chanting, the water rippled with every syllable. The graves trembled. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I just stood there staring at those little hands. Some were open, some curled into fists. A few clutched at the air as though trying to grab the rain itself. Then the ground shifted beneath me. A hollow groan rose from deep below, and the mud began to sink. The earth was collapsing under its own weight. The water surged forward, swallowing the headstones one by one. I turned and stumbled back down the path, my boots sinking into the mud with every step. The rain hit harder, stinging my face. Behind me, I could still hear them, laughing. The laughter echoed through the storm, faint but sharp, like glass breaking underwater. By the time I reached the cabin, the river had reached the porch. The water was black now, filled with bits of branches and grass, and something else, tiny stones. Smooth and white, they bumped against the wood like fingers tapping for attention. I slammed the door shut and backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. The floorboards groaned under my boots, but it wasn't just the wood. Something was moving beneath it. Then came the smell. Rot and silt and something older, the smell of the river's belly. The storm outside howled, and the wind threw the door open again. The flood pushed in, cold, heavy water rushing across the floor, carrying mud and leaves and fragments of bone, and then I saw them, handprints, small. Wet handprints forming in the rising water, pressing up from beneath the surface. One after another, dozens of them, spreading across the floorboards like veins. Each one pulsed faintly, as if alive. I stumbled backward until I hit the wall. My lantern flickered and died. The only light left came from the lightning outside, white flashes that lit the room in bursts. In one of those flashes, I saw movement under the water, shapes, tiny, pale shapes crawling beneath the surface. They were under the floor. The next flash of lightning showed something worse. A small face, gray and bloated, pressing against the boards from below. Its eyes were open, milky and still. Its mouth moved silently, forming words I couldn't hear. Then more faces followed. Dozens of them. All children. All smiling, the boards began to bend. I could hear the nails pulling loose. The wood moaned under the weight of them. I tried to block the door with a chair, but the flood pushed harder, spilling over my knees. The water wasn't just rising, it was breathing. Each wave came in rhythm, like the inhale and exhale of some unseen thing. And with every breath, the whispers grew louder. They weren't calling to me anymore. They were singing, the same lullaby as before, slow, gentle. But now it came from every direction, through the floor, the walls, the water. Down we go. Under stone, all who hear will come home. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The song wasn't outside anymore, it was inside me. Something touched my ankle, cold and soft. I kicked, splashing, but another hand grabbed me, then another. They were pulling. Their grip wasn't angry. It was tender, like they thought they were helping. The water reached my waist. I screamed, but the storm swallowed the sound. The faces under the floor looked up at me, mouths moving faster now. The boards finally split, cracking open down the middle. The water surged upward, and for a moment I saw what lay beneath. Not dirt, not roots, just black water stretching into endless dark, and floating in it, hundreds of small shapes, hands, faces, fragments of clothes, all turning slowly as if drifting in a current that had no end. The house shuddered. A piece of the floor gave way, and I fell forward, catching myself on the frame. My legs dangled into that blackness. Something brushed against them. Something soft and smooth. A hand. Then another. Dozens of them, reaching from below, touching gently, almost kindly. I kicked free, pulled myself up, and crawled toward the door. Outside, the rain had turned the world into a blur of gray. The cemetery was gone now. The graves had merged into one dark pool that stretched as far as I could see. The water rippled, and for a moment I saw them again. Tiny heads breaking the surface, just long enough to smile. And then they sank. The song followed them down, growing faint, until only the sound of the rain remained. I stayed by the doorway until morning, soaked and shaking, watching the flood slowly recede. The world felt hollow after that, quiet, but not peaceful. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, the land looked different. The grass was gone, the graves erased, the soil smooth and black, but the water never really left. Even now, days later, the ground near my cabin glistens. The puddles never dry, and sometimes when the wind passes over them just right, they ripple, like something underneath is still moving. I try not to look too long, because when I do, I see them. Small hands pressing up through the water, waiting, patient, and I can almost hear the song again, soft and distant, like a memory you can't forget. Down we go. Under stone, all who hear will come home. I think they're waiting for the next storm, and this time, I don't think they're coming alone. I still remember the sound that night. The sound of the wind moving through the metal bars of the south gate. It made this hollow whistling tone, like someone breathing just behind your ear. It was a little after 2 in the morning. The kind of cold that gets under your nails, that turns every sound sharp. I was the only guard on duty at the old estate grounds, same as always. They'd hired me because I didn't mind the quiet. Or maybe because nobody else wanted the job. The place was called Gravesend Manor, though everyone in town just called it the grounds. The house had burned decades ago, but the land still stood behind that iron fence, stretching out into the dark. A few crumbling statues, a dried fountain, and the gate, always locked, always creaking when the wind passed through. I must have checked that gate 1,000 times before. The lock was old but solid, thick with rust, chained tight around the center bars. I always tugged on it before I did my rounds, just to be sure. That night, I did the same thing. I remember it clearly. I locked it. Then I did my patrol, around the perimeter, across the small maintenance shed, and back toward the north path. It took maybe 20 minutes, maybe less. The rain had just started, soft and steady. When I came back, the gate was open, not just unlatched, open. The chain was hanging loose, ends coiled in the dirt. The padlock lay beside it, snapped clean through like it had been cut with something sharp. At first I thought maybe the metal had just given out. It was old, after all. But the break was too clean, too straight, like it had been sliced. I stood there for a while, rain dripping from the brim of my cap, just staring at it. The wind pushed the gate back and forth with a low moaning sound. I couldn't see far beyond it, just the dark stretch of the road and the faint outline of trees swaying in the storm. I should have called it in. That's what the rulebook says. Any sign of tampering, report immediately. But it was 2 in the morning. The radio barely worked in the rain, and deep down, I didn't want to call it in. I wanted to believe I'd made a mistake, so I told myself I had. Maybe I hadn't locked it right. Maybe I'd been tired. Maybe my hands were cold and I'd rushed it. I picked up the chain, wrapped it around the bars, and pushed the gate shut. It groaned like something alive. I used the spare lock from my belt, clicked it in place, and gave it a firm tug. This time I was sure. Then I turned to walk back toward the post. That's when I heard it. A sound from behind me, soft, almost swallowed by the rain, like a whisper. I froze. The kind of stillness that hurts. The whisper came again, low and wet. I turned around, shining my flashlight through the bars. Nothing, just fog rolling between the trees. The light caught a few drops of rain hanging in the air, glittering for a moment before vanishing into the dark. But then the wind shifted, and the gate, it moved, not from the breeze. This was slower, heavier. The metal dragged against the ground, inching open even though I'd just locked it. I swear I saw the padlock still hanging there, still shut. But the chain began to slide like it was alive, links scraping over the bars, twisting on their own. I dropped the flashlight. It hit the ground and rolled, the beam spinning across the wet dirt. For a second it caught something on the other side of the fence. Feet. Bare feet. They were pale, half sunk in mud, and they were facing me. I blinked, and they were gone. I backed up a few steps, heart hammering so hard it drowned out the rain. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow. My mind playing with shapes, but then I saw it, pressed into the mud near the gate. A footprint, small, like a child's. That's when I called it in. The line crackled for a moment before dispatch answered. I told them someone might be on the property, that I needed backup. They said the nearest patrol was 20 minutes away. 20 minutes. I didn't want to wait there, staring at that gate, but I couldn't leave it open either. So, I took a step closer, flashlight trembling in my hand, and tried to see if the lock was still holding. That's when I realized it wasn't raining anymore. The sound had stopped completely. The air went still. The only thing I could hear was my own breathing. Then, something touched the bars. Not from my side, from the other. A soft tap like a fingernail. Then another. Then a slow drag of something scraping along the metal. It went from left to right, then right to left, like someone tracing the pattern of the gate with their hand. I aimed the flashlight again, and the beam landed on a face, just for a second. It was pale, wet, and still. Eyes wide open, staring at me through the bars. Lips parted as if about to speak. Then the light flickered, and she was gone. I stumbled backward, slipping in the mud. My radio fell from my belt, hissing with static. I grabbed it, shouted for backup again, but all I got was silence. The gate stood still. The padlock glinted in the beam. The chain hung loose again. I couldn't tell if I was breathing or drowning. My mouth tasted like metal. I forced myself forward, reached for the gate, and slammed it shut one more time. The moment it clicked into place, the wind came back, hard and sharp. It howled through the bars, through the trees, through everything, and beneath it, a voice. Small, soft, whispering from the other side. It said my name. Not loud, not angry, just calm. Like it had known me for years. I didn't move. Couldn't. I just stood there, the cold biting through my jacket, rain dripping from my chin. staring at that gate as the wind pushed it against the lock again and again. When the backup finally arrived, they found me sitting on the ground, soaked, pale, and shaking. They checked the gate, the path, the fence. No footprints. No sign of anyone, and the lock still sealed. Perfectly fine. They told me it must have been fatigue, a long shift, maybe the storm messing with my head, but I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. A few nights later, I quit the job. Told them I was moving out of town, but before I left, I went back one last time, just to see. The padlock was gone again, and this time, there was something new carved into the metal post beside the gate. 3 small letters, scratched deep into the rust, my initials, and below them, a single word, written in shaky, childlike handwriting. Home. I still hear that gate in my dreams sometimes. That slow creak, that whisper. And every time the wind moves just right, it sounds like it's calling for me, like it's waiting. 1,400 words. I used to think cemeteries were peaceful, quiet still, untouched by time. Now, I know better. After that night with the gate, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in my apartment sounded like metal bending, every gust of wind like that same voice whispering my name. So when the security company offered me a different shift, one that covered the cemetery on the east side of town, I took it. I told myself it would help me forget. But I think I knew, deep down, I was only walking closer to whatever had started calling me that night. The cemetery was old, the kind that had stopped accepting burials years ago, overgrown and half forgotten. Most of the headstones were so worn you couldn't read the names anymore. Just shapes, sinking into the ground like they wanted to disappear. The first few nights were quiet. Too quiet. My job was simple. Walk the perimeter, check the gates, make sure no one was sneaking in. Teenagers like to come there sometimes, drinking or daring each other to touch the oldest graves. I used to do the same thing when I was younger, but after a few rounds, I realized something strange. No matter how far I walked, the air never changed. The same stillness followed me, heavy and unmoving, like the whole place was holding its breath. The 5th night I saw him. It started with a light. A small, warm glow moving between the rows of graves near the far edge of the property. At first, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight. Then it flickered again, slow, steady, rhythmic, like someone carrying a lantern and swinging it gently with each step. I froze, watching from the hill above the path. The light was moving deeper into the cemetery, toward the older section that sat behind a line of half-collapsed crypts. No one was supposed to be there. I called out, my voice low but sharp. "Hey, you can't be in there!" The lantern didn't stop. It just kept drifting, bobbing up and down as if the figure carrying it hadn't even heard me. Something about that light bothered me. It didn't move like electric light. No harsh edges, no glare. Just soft amber like fire inside glass. I climbed down the hill, boots sinking into the damp soil. The air grew colder with every step. The grass looked silver under the lantern's reflection. "Sir," I shouted again, "you need to leave the premises." The light slowed. Then it turned. The beam swung toward me, and for a brief second it lit up the figure holding it. A man. Tall, thin, dressed in dark, old-fashioned clothes, the kind you only see in faded black and white photos. His face was half hidden by the brim of a wide hat, but his mouth looked wrong, too pale, too still. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just stood there, the light swaying in his hand. I wanted to move, to say something, but my body wouldn't listen. My throat felt tight, like I'd swallowed ice. Then, without a sound, the man turned and began walking again, deeper into the cemetery, away from me. I followed. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to believe what I'd seen. Maybe I thought I'd find someone living, a vagrant, a lost traveler, anything to make it normal. But the deeper I went, the heavier the air became. The light from my flashlight barely cut through the dark. I could still see his lantern, though, always just far enough ahead to keep me chasing. The ground started to dip, and I realized where he was going. toward the old section, the one the town sealed off after the floods years ago. I'd read about it in the report. A burst pipe, a sinkhole, graves washed open by the water. They'd never repaired it, said it was unsafe. The man's lantern stopped by a large oak tree that grew crooked out of the slope. He turned, raising the light slightly. For a second, I thought he was showing me something. There was a grave at his feet. The headstone was cracked, the inscription barely visible beneath moss. But under the light, I could make out the first name. It was mine. I took a step back, my boots slipping in the mud. The lantern flickered again, once, twice, and then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the cemetery. I ran. Branches scraped my face as I stumbled back toward the main path. My flashlight blinked and died, leaving me blind except for flashes of lightning far off in the clouds. I didn't stop until I reached the gates. When I turned around, the hill was empty. The only light came from the faint reflection of my own breath in the air. The next morning, I went straight to the caretaker's office. I told him what I'd seen, a trespasser with a lantern, maybe a prankster. The old man behind the desk didn't even blink. He just stared at me for a long moment and said, "You saw the lantern man?" The name alone made my stomach twist. He told me the story like it was something everyone in town already knew. Years ago, before the floods, there had been a gravedigger who worked the cemetery alone at night. He'd use a lantern to light his way between the plots. One winter, he went missing. They found his shovel near the river, his lantern still burning beside it. They never found his body. People said his light still moved through the graves on cold nights, looking for something, or someone. I wanted to laugh it off. I told him it must have been a coincidence. Maybe some kid found an old lantern and thought it'd be funny. The caretaker just shook his head. "Funny thing," he said. "That grave you saw, the one by the oak, it's unmarked now, but it used to belong to him." I didn't go back that night. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop thinking about that light, about how it seemed to move like it had a purpose. On the 7th night, I drove back anyway. The air was thick with fog, so heavy I could barely see the fence. I parked by the gate and waited. Midnight passed. Nothing. 1 o'clock. Still nothing. Then, right around 2, I saw it again. The glow, soft and slow, winding through the trees. I told myself not to move, just stay in the car. But the light grew, brighter, closer, until it hovered right behind the fence, just a few feet from where I sat. I could see the shape of the lantern now, the glass cracked, flame trembling inside. The hand holding it was bone-thin, skin gray and wet like it had been soaked too long in water. It lifted the lantern higher, and in the reflection on the glass, I saw a face. My own. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the light turned and drifted back toward the graves. I didn't chase it this time. I couldn't. My whole body was shaking, my mouth dry, my chest tight. But I watched it go, watched it weave between the headstones until it disappeared near the oak. The next morning, when the sun came up, I went to see for myself. The fog was gone, the grass was wet with dew, and there, by the oak tree, was a single lantern sitting upright in the dirt. It wasn't lit, but the inside of the glass was covered, in condensation, as if something had just been burning inside it. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it until the wind picked up and knocked it onto its side. Something fell out of it. A small blackened tag attached to a piece of rusted chain. It had my name carved into it, not written. Carved, and below it, the date. Tomorrow's date. I left the cemetery after that. I didn't wait for my shift to end. I never went back. But sometimes, when the power flickers in my apartment late at night, I see a faint orange light through the window, drifting between the trees behind my building. It always moves the same way, slow, steady, rhythmic. And if I listen closely enough, I can hear footsteps in the wet grass, coming closer, every night. I didn't want to believe what I saw that night. The lantern, the grave, my name. It had to be a trick. Some stupid prank by the caretaker or a bored kid trying to mess with me, but deep down, something in my gut told me the truth, that it wasn't a prank, that the cemetery had noticed me. I quit the job the next morning, didn't even collect my last paycheck. For a while, it helped. I slept a little better. I stopped dreaming about that light moving through the fog. I even convinced myself it had all been stress, a hallucination brought on by long hours and loneliness. But the quiet didn't last. It started with little things. The sound of footsteps behind me when I walked home. The faint smell of wet soil that followed me everywhere, like the scent of rain, but heavier, rotting. Then, one night, I found something outside my apartment door. A small tag. Metal. My name carved into it. The same one that had fallen from the lantern. I threw it away. But the next morning it was back, lying perfectly centered on my doormat, as if someone had placed it there carefully. That's when I started keeping notes. Times, dates, details, anything I could remember. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The entries began simple. Lantern appeared again in dreams. He was closer this time. He didn't have a face. But by the end of that week, my writing looked like it wasn't even mine. Just lines of words scratched across the paper. It's not a dream. It's not a dream. He's showing me something. On the 10th night, I woke to the sound of rain hitting my window. At first, I thought it was just another storm. But then I saw the light again, glowing faintly through the curtains. The same soft amber hue. It flickered once like it was waiting for me, and before I could think, I was already outside. The street was empty, water running down the gutters in thin silver lines. The light was moving ahead of me, just like before, but slower this time, almost patient. I followed it. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop. Every step felt like it was pulling something deeper out of me, something buried. The city was silent, as if the whole world had gone to sleep. The light turned down an alley near the old churchyard. I hesitated for a second, heart pounding, breath coming out in clouds. Then I saw the gate. It was rusted, tall, and familiar. The same gate I'd sworn I'd never walk through again, the cemetery. But it looked different now, darker, heavier. The air shimmered with mist, and the grass glistened under the rain. The lantern moved just beyond the gate, waiting. "Why?" I whispered. "What do you want from me?" No answer. Just that quiet hum of rain on stone. I pushed the gate open. The hinges screamed. The path was covered in mud, footprints deep and uneven. At first, I thought they were mine, from the last time I'd been here, but no. These were smaller, narrower, dozens of them, leading toward the hill where the oak tree stood. And the light, always the light, glowed brighter as I walked. I could see him now. The lantern man. He was facing away from me, the edges of his coat flapping in the wind. The flame inside his lantern barely moved, no matter how hard the rain fell. "Stop!" I shouted, voice shaking. "I know what you're doing!" He didn't stop, just kept walking. I followed him up the hill, boots sinking into the mud. The old oak loomed above, its branches black and bare. At the base of the tree, the lantern man halted. Slowly, he raised the lantern and set it down beside a freshly turned patch of earth. Then he stepped aside. I looked down and saw a new headstone, still wet from the rain, still gleaming under the faint light. My heart stuttered. There it was, my full name. The date, tomorrow. I stumbled back, shaking my head. No, this isn't real. This isn't... The lantern man lifted his head. For the first time, I saw his face. It wasn't pale anymore. It wasn't even skin, just soil, packed tight, streaked with veins of dark water like mud shaped into the memory of a human face. And beneath that, the faint glimmer of bone. He opened his mouth and water poured out, steady, endless, black as tar. Then he spoke, not with sound. Not really. It was more like the words formed inside me, crawling up through my chest and filling my head. You were always meant to dig. The earth beneath my boots shifted. I heard it groan, like something waking up. The ground split slightly near the grave, and the smell of wet soil hit me, thick and sweet and sick. I looked down. 2 pale hands were pressing up through the dirt. Not small, not skeletal, but mine. They were my hands, clawing from beneath the grave. I stumbled back, falling into the mud. My flashlight rolled out of my hand and went dark. The lantern man stepped closer, his light flickering with each movement. The rain had stopped now, but I could still hear water dripping somewhere. Soft, steady, rhythmic. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body wouldn't listen. The hands beneath the soil began to pull free, fingers twitching, nails broken. Then a face emerged from the mud. It was me, eyes open, mouth full of dirt, and yet it was breathing. The lantern man raised the lantern higher, and I saw it. The light reflecting in the hollow of my own dead eyes. The corpse, my corpse, opened its mouth. And the same thick black water poured out, spilling over the earth, washing away the name on the headstone. When I looked again, it wasn't my name anymore. It was something else. The same name I'd read in the caretaker's book and the gravedigger, the man who vanished years ago. The lantern man stepped closer. His face began to shift, melting like wax in the rain. Beneath the mud, I saw pieces of others, faces, mouths, eyes, all pressed together, whispering. Each one looked terrified. I turned and ran. The path was gone. The fog was everywhere now, thick as smoke. I could hear footsteps behind me, slow, steady, the sound of boots in wet grass. When I reached the gate, it was closed. I pushed, pulled, screamed, nothing. Then I felt it, a hand on my shoulder, cold, heavy, wet. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But a voice slid into my ear, low and broken. You locked the gate. Remember? The sound of metal clicked beside me. The same click I'd heard that very first night when I thought I'd secured everything. The lock snapped shut. The lantern light flared one last time behind me, then disappeared. When I woke, it was morning. I was lying outside the gate, mud on my clothes, rain still dripping from the leaves. The cemetery looked normal again. Quiet. Empty. The caretaker found me there and helped me up. He asked if I was all right. I didn't answer. I just looked past him, toward the oak tree in the distance. And there, barely visible through the morning mist, was a new headstone. Even from that far, I could see it clearly, my name. But the date wasn't tomorrow anymore. It was today. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember packing. But I know I left town that afternoon. Now every night when I close my eyes, I see the glow again. The lantern swaying slowly in the dark. Sometimes I think I hear digging beneath my floorboards, the scrape of a shovel against stone. And sometimes, when the lights go out, I see my own reflection in the window, holding a lantern, waiting.